The old cathedral outside Ko had been abandoned for decades, but tonight its broken windows glowed with unnatural light. Issei Hyoudou skidded across shattered pews, his boosted gear roaring against his forearm, and tried not to think about how badly this fight had gone. Boost! The gauntlet's voice cracked through the ruined nave. Issei surged forward, but the stray devil in front of him barely flinched. It was massive, a fused horror of claws and wings that had once been three lesser devils bound together in some forbidden ritual. Rias had warned him this hunt would be dangerous. He hadn't expected the thing to have already eaten 2 exorcists and a low-class devil scout before he ever arrived. "You're slower than the last one," the creature rasped, its voice layered with 3 throats speaking at once. "I was hoping the Red Dragon Emperor would be more interesting." Issei wiped blood from his lip and grinned even though his legs were shaking. "Give me a second. I'm still warming up." He wasn't. He was out of tricks, out of stamina, and painfully aware that Rias's peerage was scattered across the district chasing down the creature's spawn instead of standing beside him. He had insisted on taking point. He had wanted, for once, to prove he could hold a line without anyone bailing him out. The stray devil lunged. Issei threw himself sideways, felt claws rake across his shoulder, and slammed into a collapsed pillar hard enough to see white. Pain lit up every nerve in his body. He tried to push himself up and found his arms wouldn't answer. "Boost," the gauntlet said again, quieter now, almost apologetic. "I know," Issei muttered. "I know, buddy." The stray devil loomed over him, wings spread wide enough to blot out the shattered ceiling and the stars beyond it. Issei stared up at it and thought, with strange clarity, that this was a stupid way to die. Not in some grand battle against a Satan or a fallen angel general. In a broken church, alone, because he'd wanted to prove a point. Then the floor beneath the altar cracked open. It wasn't an explosion. It wasn't fire or light, or any of the things Issei expected from magic. It was more like the world took a breath it had been holding for a very long time. A hairline fracture spread across the stone floor beneath the ruined altar, and from it rose a presence that made every hair on Issei's body stand on end. The stray devil actually staggered back, its 3 throats suddenly silent. Something ancient had been sleeping under that cathedral. Something older than the cathedral itself, older than the factions that fought over Ko, maybe older than the war between the 3 great powers. It had been sealed there so long ago that even the ground had forgotten what it was sealing, and it was awake now. Issei felt it before he saw anything, a pressure settling over the room like the air before a storm. A voice spoke, not in words exactly, more like a thought pressed directly into his mind, calm and vast and utterly without malice. "You are dying." "Yeah," Issei croaked. "Kind of figured that part out myself. You have a fragment of a dragon god bound to your arm. Curious. It is not enough. It was never going to be enough for what comes. The stray devil recovered its nerve and lunged for Issei's exposed throat. What happened next, Issei would spend days trying to properly remember. A ribbon of pale golden light lashed out from the cracked floor and caught the creature mid-leap, not burning it, not cutting it, simply unmaking the momentum of its charge so completely that it hung frozen in the air for one impossible heartbeat before crashing down in a heap. "I require a vessel," the voice said. "You are wounded, foolish, and stubborn enough not to run." "That will do." Wait, Issei managed. "Wait, hold on, what does that even mean, vessel? I don't know what you are talking about." The light poured into him before he could finish the sentence. It didn't hurt the way he expected. He had braced for agony, for his body being torn apart and rebuilt by something far too big for him to hold. Instead, it felt like sinking into warm water after a long day, like a weight he hadn't known he was carrying finally being set down. Memories that weren't his own flickered at the edge of his awareness, mountains that didn't exist anymore, skies with 3 moons, a war fought with weapons that had no names left in any language spoken by mortals. Then it was over, and Issei was lying on his back in a ruined church, staring up at a hole in the ceiling, and the stray devil was gone. Not dead. Gone, as if it had simply been erased from that particular moment in time. He sat up slowly. His shoulder didn't hurt anymore. He looked down at his arm and found the boosted gear had gone quiet, its familiar green gem dark and still, and beneath his skin something else pulsed instead, a faint golden light that traced up his forearm like a vein of buried sunlight. "Drake?" he said aloud, and his voice sounded strange to his own ears. "You still in there, partner?" There was a long pause. "I am," the dragon's voice finally rumbled, and for the first time in the 2 years Issei had known him, Drake sounded uncertain. "Though I confess I do not know what has joined us." Issei looked at his glowing arm, then at the empty church, then up at the broken ceiling and the ordinary night sky beyond it, and thought that Rias was going to kill him for going into that fight alone. He was, unfortunately, entirely correct. By the time he limped out of the cathedral's ruined doorway, 3 familiar figures were already sprinting across the overgrown courtyard toward him. Rias reached him first, her crimson hair catching the moonlight, her expression somewhere between fury and terror. "Issei." She grabbed his face in both hands and tilted it toward the light, checking his eyes, his pulse, anything that might tell her how badly he was hurt. "You went in without waiting for backup." "I told you to wait." "I know," he said. "I'm sorry. I thought I could handle it." "You are covered in blood," Akeno said, arriving a step behind Rias with Asia close on her heels. Her usual teasing lilt had gone thin and worried. "Era Issei-kun, you always say that right before you almost die." "To be fair," Issei said, "I think I did almost die. Something weird happened." Asia was already kneeling in front of him, her hands glowing with soft green healing light as she pressed them to the torn fabric at his shoulder. "Your wound is already closing," she said, blinking. "I have not even started yet." "Yeah," Issei said. "About that." He held up his arm. In the dim light, the golden vein beneath his skin pulsed once, slow and steady, like a second heartbeat layered over his own. Rias went very still. "That is not your sacred gear," she said quietly. "No," Issei agreed. "I don't think it is." For a moment none of them spoke. Somewhere in the ruined nave behind him, the cracked floor beneath the altar had already sealed itself shut again, as though nothing had ever broken free of it at all, and the only proof that something ancient had passed through that place was the faint golden light still tracing slow circles beneath Issei Hyoudu's skin. Rias took a breath, and when she spoke again her voice had the calm, deliberate steadiness she used when she was hiding how frightened she actually was. "We are going back to the school," she said. "Now. And you are going to explain everything you remember, in order, starting from the moment you went through those doors without me." Issei managed a tired, crooked smile. "It's kind of a long story." "Then we had better get started," Rias said, and took his arm to help him walk, and did not let go of it the entire way back. The Occult Research Club room felt smaller than usual with all of them crowded inside it. Rias sat behind her desk with her fingers laced tightly together. Akeno stood near the window, arms folded, her usual playful smile nowhere to be found. Asia perched on the edge of the couch beside Issei, close enough that her shoulder pressed against his, as though proximity alone could keep whatever had happened to him from getting worse. Kiba and Kaneko had been called in as well, along with Rias's familiar, a small dragon that curled anxiously in the corner. Even Graphia's summoning circle waited dormant on the floor in case Rias decided the situation warranted contacting the Gremory household directly. "Start from the beginning," Rias said. "Everything you remember." Issei rubbed the back of his neck. "The stray devil had me pinned. I thought that was it. Then the floor under the altar just kind of cracked open, and something came out of it. It wasn't attacking me. It talked to me. It said it needed a vessel." "A vessel," Rias repeated carefully. "Not a host. Not a partner. A vessel." "Yeah. And then it was just inside me, I guess. The stray devil disappeared. Not killed. Gone, like it got erased." Issei held up his arm again, and the faint golden light pulsed beneath his skin in the dim clubroom lighting, more visible now against the shadows than it had been outside. "And Drake's been quiet ever since." "Quieter than usual, I mean." "I am listening," Drake's voice rumbled from the boosted gear, though the gem itself stayed dark. "I simply have very little to offer at the moment. What has joined us is not something I recognize, and in over 1,000 years of existence, that has never once been true." Rias's expression tightened. She looked at Akeno, who gave a small, grim shake of her head, and then at Kaneko, whose cat-like ears had flattened against her hair the moment Issei first described the cathedral. There was a sealed god beneath that cathedral, Kaneko said quietly. I could smell it the second we walked in. Old power. Old enough that it does not belong to any of the three factions, or to the Norse, or the Greek, or anyone documented in the histories we were taught. How old is old enough to not belong to anyone? Issei asked. Old enough to predate the war between God, the fallen angels, and the devils, Rias said slowly, as though the words themselves were dangerous to speak aloud. That cathedral was built on ground that was already considered cursed 1,000 years before the church that built it existed. There are records, very old ones, buried deep in Gremory archives, about something called the Severance. A war fought between beings that came before any of the current pantheons. Most of the details were lost. What survived described a handful of primordial gods who were sealed away by the alliance of every faction that existed at the time, because none of them alone was strong enough to destroy what those gods actually were. So you're telling me, Issei said slowly, that I just got possessed by one of those. Not possessed, Rias said. If it wanted to possess you, you would not still be you right now. Something else happened. It gave itself to you, willingly, as though it chose you specifically. It said I was wounded, foolish, and stubborn enough not to run, Issei offered. Akeno let out a short, surprised laugh despite the tension in the room. Well, it is not wrong. This is not funny, Akeno, Rias said, though there was no real anger in it, only exhaustion. I know, Akeno said, sobering. I am only trying to keep us from panicking. Because right now, Bucho, I am fairly certain we should be panicking a little. Asia had been quiet through most of the conversation, her small hands still glowing faintly with residual healing energy, as she kept them pressed lightly to Issei's shoulder even though the wound had long since closed. Can I ask something? She said softly. Of course, Rias said. When you touched him, did it feel wrong? Asia asked. The power inside him. Because when I try to heal him now, it does not feel like devil magic, or sacred gear energy, or anything I have ever sensed before. It feels warm. It feels almost like it is helping me heal him faster instead of resisting me. Everyone looked at Issei's arm again. The golden light pulsed, slow and steady. It's not fighting me, Issei said, surprised to realize it as he said it out loud. It feels like it's just there. Waiting. Waiting for what? Kiba asked, speaking for the first time since the meeting started. Nobody had an answer for that. Rias stood, walked around her desk, and knelt in front of Issei so that she could look directly into his eyes. Up close, he could see how tired she looked, the strain she was working hard to keep out of her voice. I need you to understand something, she said. If word gets out that an unknown ancient god has bonded itself to a human host inside my territory, every faction with an interest in ancient power is going to want a piece of you. The church will want to study you or destroy you, depending on which wing gets there first. Grigori will want to recruit you or dissect you, and I genuinely could not tell you which option Azazel would find more interesting. And there are elements within the underworld who would see a devil's servant carrying primordial power as either a prize to be claimed or a threat to be eliminated before it grows any stronger. Great, Issei said. Love that for me. I am not telling you this to frighten you, Rias said. I am telling you because from this moment forward, you are not going anywhere alone. Not to another hunt, not to school, not to buy groceries. Someone is with you at all times until we understand what happened to you and how to protect you if the wrong people come looking. I volunteer, Akeno said immediately, raising a hand with theatrical brightness that didn't quite mask the real worry underneath it. Me too, Asia said, just as quickly, her cheeks coloring slightly at her own eagerness. Rias allowed herself the faintest smile despite everything. I was going to insist on that arrangement regardless, she said. But I appreciate the enthusiasm. Issei looked around the room at all of them, at Kiba's steady concern, Kaneko's watchful silence, Akeno's stubborn brightness, Asia's quiet determination, and Rias kneeling in front of him with her hand now resting over his on the arm where the ancient light pulsed beneath his skin, and felt something settle in his chest that had nothing to do with the strange power now living inside him. Okay, he said. So what do we do first? First, Rias said, standing and smoothing her skirt with brisk, businesslike efficiency that didn't fully hide the tremor in her hands, we find out exactly what you are carrying inside you. And we do it before anyone else figures it out first. Outside the clubroom window, the night had gone very still, the kind of stillness that settles over a city right before something enormous decides to happen. None of them noticed the faint golden shimmer that had, for just a moment, traced itself across the night sky above Ko Academy, visible only to anyone who happened to be looking for exactly that kind of thing. Somewhere far away, in a tower of black glass that belonged to no faction anyone in that clubroom would have recognized, someone was looking for exactly that kind of thing, and had just found it. Morning came too fast, the way it always did after a night that should have ended in a hospital bed instead of a classroom desk. Issei sat through first period without absorbing a single word the teacher said, his attention split between the golden pulse beneath his sleeve and the two girls flanking him on either side. Akeno had claimed the seat to his left, which was not technically her assigned seat, and had simply informed the transfer student who normally sat there that she would be relocating for the foreseeable future. Asia sat behind him, close enough that he could feel her attention on the back of his neck like a physical thing. "You're staring at my arm," Issei murmured during a lull while the teacher wrote on the board. "I am making sure it does not do anything alarming," Akeno whispered back, though her violet eyes were warm rather than teasing for once. "Era, is that not allowed?" "I didn't say that." At lunch they gathered in the clubroom instead of the cafeteria, a small mercy that let Issei stop pretending everything was normal. Rias had spent the morning combing through Gremory family archives on a tablet borrowed from the underworld's restricted network, and the lines around her eyes suggested she hadn't slept. "I found something," she said, without preamble, the moment the door closed behind them. "A partial record. It is old enough that even the translation software struggled with half of it, but there is a name attached to the severance conflict that keeps recurring. Aurelian. That's kind of a cool name for something that almost killed me," Issei said. "It did not almost kill you," Rias said. "According to what I have found, Aurelian and beings like it were considered guardians before they were considered threats. Primordial gods tied to concepts older than any single pantheon. Light before there was a sun to carry it. Order before there were laws to enforce it. They did not start the severance. They were dragged into it when younger, hungrier gods decided the old order needed to be replaced. So it's one of the good guys," Issei said, hopeful. "It is complicated," Rias said. "The younger gods that started the severance were eventually defeated, by an alliance that included Aurelian and beings like it. But by the time the war ended, the surviving primordials had grown too powerful, too strange, too far removed from anything the newer factions could predict or control. So instead of thanking them, the alliance sealed them away. All of them. For the safety of everyone that came after." Akeno's jaw tightened. "So Issei is now carrying around a god that got betrayed by the very people it saved." "That is one way to put it," Rias said. Issei was quiet for a moment, turning that over. "It didn't seem angry," he finally said. "When it talked to me, it didn't feel like it wanted revenge or anything like that. It just felt tired. And kind of relieved, honestly. Like it had been waiting a long time for someone to finally let it out." "That is either very reassuring," Akeno said, "or extremely concerning, depending entirely on what it plans to do now that it is finally free." A knock at the door interrupted them, sharp and deliberate. Kiba opened it to find Sona Citri standing in the hallway, her expression composed as always but her eyes sharp with an urgency that made Rias immediately straighten. "We need to talk," Sona said. "Privately, and quickly. Something disturbed the wards along the eastern district border last night, right around the time your familiar reported unusual activity near the old cathedral." Rias exchanged a glance with Issei. "How disturbed?" "Disturbed enough that 3 separate observation posts registered a spike they could not classify," Sona said. "And disturbed enough that I have already received an inquiry this morning from a contact inside Gregory, asking, very casually, whether anything interesting happened in Ko last night." The room went cold in a way that had nothing to do with the weather. "That was fast," Issei said quietly. "Gregory's information network is extremely good," Sona said. "It has to be," Given how many of their operatives are fallen angels who used to have access to divine intelligence networks. If they are already asking questions, it means something about last night registered on instruments sensitive enough to notice things most factions cannot detect. What did you tell your contact? Rias asked. That I had no idea what they were talking about, Sona said. Which was true at the time. It is somewhat less true now. Rias closed her eyes briefly, gathering herself. I need you to keep it that way as long as possible. Buy us time to understand what we are dealing with before anyone official gets involved. I can buy you days, Sona said. Not weeks. Gregory is patient but not blind, and if Issei's aura continues to shift the way you are describing, someone with actual detection equipment is eventually going to walk through this town and notice immediately. Issei glanced down at his arm again. The golden light seemed, if anything, slightly brighter than it had been that morning. Is it getting stronger? Asia asked, worry creasing her gentle features. Drag? Issei asked quietly. It is not growing louder, the dragon rumbled after a pause. It is growing more comfortable. There is a difference, and I confess I do not know which one should worry me more. Sona's gaze flicked to Issei with new interest, the analytical focus of someone recalculating a problem in real time. May I examine the aura directly? I would like to understand what specifically Gregory's instruments might be detecting. Rias nodded permission, and Sona approached, her own magic gathering in a faint violet shimmer around her fingers as she reached toward Issei's arm without quite touching it. For a long moment she simply studied the golden light, her expression unreadable. This is not a demonic signature, she finally said. It is not angelic, and it is not the boosted gear's usual output either, though it seems to be layered somehow with the gear's dormant frequency. If I had to guess, and I want to be clear that this is only a guess, I would say this reads less like a weapon and more like a key. A key to what? Issei asked. That, Sona said, straightening, is precisely the question I would want answered before anyone from another faction gets close enough to try answering it themselves. The bell rang somewhere down the hall, distant and ordinary, an absurd intrusion of routine into a conversation about ancient gods and forbidden wars. Rias let out a slow breath and looked around the room at everyone gathered there, calculating, the way she always did when the stakes had just quietly gotten much higher than anyone wanted to admit. We keep training as normal, she said. We keep our schedules exactly as they would look to anyone watching. And we find out everything we can about Aurelian before anyone from Gregory, or the church, or the underworld decides Issei is worth the trouble of taking a closer look. And if they decide that anyway? Kiba asked. Rias's eyes hardened, crimson and certain. Then they will have to go through all of us first. Nobody in the room disagreed. After Sona left, promising to send word the moment anything changed, the clubroom settled into a heavy quiet. Rias returned to her tablet, scrolling through fragments of translated text with the tired focus of someone who had already read the same passage a dozen times without finding the answer she needed. Akeno busied herself preparing tea for everyone, though her movements were slower than usual, more deliberate, the kind of careful busywork people did when their hands needed something to occupy them while their minds worked through fear. Issei found himself watching all of them, Kiba quietly sharpening a practice sword that did not need sharpening. Kaneko curled into the corner of the couch with her knees drawn up, and felt a familiar, uncomfortable guilt settle into his chest. None of them had asked for this. None of them had gone looking for an ancient god beneath a cathedral. They had simply been dragged into it because he had insisted on taking point on a hunt he should have waited for backup to handle. You are thinking too loudly, Akeno said, setting a cup of tea in front of him without being asked. I can practically hear it from across the room. Sorry, Issei said. Just thinking about how this is my fault. If I hadn't gone in alone, none of you would be dealing with Gregory sniffing around now. That is a very Issei thing to say, Akeno replied, settling into the seat beside him with her own cup. And also completely wrong. You did not choose to have an ancient god crack open beneath a cathedral floor. None of us could have predicted that, not even Bucho, and she predicts everything. I heard that, Rias said, without looking up from her tablet, though the faintest smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. Asia, who had been quietly listening from her spot near the window, spoke up with the gentle certainty she always carried when she believed something completely. I do not think it was an accident that it chose you, Issei-san. Whatever it is, it said it needed someone stubborn enough not to run. I think it saw exactly who you are, and it was right to choose you, even if none of us understand yet what that means. The room fell quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet this time, softer, less afraid. Issei looked down at his tea, at the faint golden light still tracing slow patterns beneath his skin, and allowed himself, just for a moment, to believe that Asia might be right. Training that evening took place in the underground chamber beneath the old school building, a cavernous space reinforced with enough protective wards to withstand a small war. Rias wanted to see what the new power could actually do, in a controlled setting, before Issei found himself forced to use it again in a fight he hadn't chosen. Try summoning it, Rias said, standing well back with Akeno and Asia beside her. Slowly. We do not need a repeat of last night. Issei closed his eyes and reached inward, past the familiar warmth of Drake's presence, toward the quieter golden light that had settled somewhere beneath it. For a moment nothing happened. Then he felt it stir, gently, almost curiously, like something waking up in a room it did not yet fully recognize. Whoa, he said, as his right arm lit up not with the boosted gear's usual red and green scales, but with something that looked more like sunlight given form, delicate golden patterns spreading across his skin in shapes that reminded him faintly of old temple carvings. You are trying to force it, the voice said inside his mind, calm as ever. There is no need. I am not the weapon you draw. I am a door you choose to open. Okay, Issei muttered. Door, not weapon, got it. What happens if I open the door all the way? That depends entirely on what you intend to do once it is open. Rias watched the exchange with sharp attention. Ask it what it can actually do, she said. Combat applications. Defensive capabilities. Anything useful. Issei relayed the question, and after a moment's consideration, the golden light along his arm shifted, coalescing briefly into the faint outline of a shield before dissolving again. It says it can protect, Issei reported. And it says it can undo things. Not destroy. Undo. Like what happened to the stray devil last night. Undo, Akeno repeated slowly. That is an unusual way to describe a power. It felt weird to watch, Issei admitted. It wasn't like an attack. It was more like the thing just stopped existing in that moment, the same way you'd erase a mistake off a whiteboard. Rias's expression grew thoughtful and slightly alarmed at the same time. A power that unmakes rather than destroys is significantly harder to defend against, and significantly harder to predict. I want you practicing restraint above everything else until we understand its limits. Copy that, Issei said. Restraint. I can do restraint. Akeno snorted softly. You once boosted so hard against a training dummy that you put a hole through the reinforced wall behind it. That was one time. It was 3 times, Kaneko said from the corner, not looking up from the drink she was sipping. Issei decided not to argue the point further. They worked through the evening in careful increments, Rias calling for small controlled bursts of the golden light and watching how it interacted with Issei's other abilities, how it layered against Drake's dragon aura without conflict, how it responded to Asia's healing magic when she occasionally stepped in to check that the strain wasn't hurting him. Each test left Issei more tired than the last, not physically exhausted the way training usually left him, but drained in some deeper, stranger way, as though the power was borrowing something from him each time he called on it. We should stop for tonight, Asia said eventually, noticing the way his shoulders had begun to sag between exercises. He needs rest. Rias nodded, calling a halt, and the group began packing up the training equipment scattered around the chamber. Akeno lingered near Issei as the others drifted toward the stairs, her expression uncharacteristically serious in the dim light. Can I ask you something? She said quietly, once they were mostly alone. Yeah, of course. Are you frightened? She asked. Of what is inside you now? You can tell me the truth. I will not think less of you for it. Issei considered the question honestly instead of brushing it off with a joke, which was his usual instinct. A little, he admitted. Mostly I'm scared of what happens to everyone around me if this thing turns out to be more dangerous than it seems. I've already got people risking themselves for me because of Drake. I don't want to be the reason something worse happens to you guys. Something softened in Akeno's expression, the teasing mask slipping away entirely for a rare, unguarded moment. You know, she said, my mother was a shrine maiden, and my father was a fallen angel. For most of my life I believed that made me something wrong. Something that should not exist, caught between two worlds that both wanted to claim only the parts of me that were useful to them. Akeno, you don't have to explain any of that. Let me finish, she said gently. What I am trying to say is that Rias found me when I believed there was nothing left in me worth saving, and she did not care what I was made of, only who I chose to be. I think, whatever is inside you now, it does not change who you are either. It is simply one more thing you get to decide how to use. And for what it is worth, I do not think you would ever choose to use it in a way that hurts the people you care about. I have known you too long to believe otherwise. Issei felt something tighten in his throat that had nothing to do with exhaustion. Thanks, Akeno. That actually helps. Era, she said, the familiar teasing lilt returning to her voice as quickly as it had disappeared, do not get used to me being sincere. I have a reputation to maintain. He laughed, and some of the tension in the room eased with it. Across the chamber, Asia had been quietly watching the exchange, and when Akeno finally moved off to help Rias with the last of the equipment, she approached Issei with the particular hesitant courage she always seemed to gather right before saying something important. Issei-san, she said, I want you to know that whatever this power turns out to be, I will help you carry it. Whatever it takes. You have never once made me feel like a burden, even when I could not fight, even when all I could do was heal. I do not want you to feel alone in this either. Issei looked down at the small, earnest girl who had once been cast out of the only home she had ever known for the crime of healing a devil, and who had chosen, every single day since, to stay standing beside people the church had told her to fear. I know, he said softly. I'm not alone. Not with you guys around. Above them, unnoticed by anyone in the training chamber, the wards protecting the school flickered for just a fraction of a second, so briefly that even Sona's sensitive instruments failed to register the interruption. Somewhere beyond the edge of Ko, something had brushed against the barrier and withdrawn again, patient, curious, and very much aware that it had found exactly what it was looking for. 3 days passed in a strange, watchful quiet. Issei went to class, trained in the evenings, and grew slowly more comfortable with the golden light beneath his skin, though it never stopped feeling like a presence borrowed rather than owned. He caught himself talking to it sometimes, quiet questions in the space between classes, and more often than not it answered, patient and unhurried, teaching him in fragments the way an old scholar might teach a student it had decided was worth the effort. You keep trying to control me, it told him once, during a free period when he'd wandered to the roof to think. That is not how this works. I am not a tool in your hand. I am closer to a memory you are learning to carry. That's a weird way to think about power, Issei said. Power is only weird to those who have never lost everything they thought they were protecting, the voice replied, and something in its tone made Issei decide not to push further that day. On the 4th evening, Rias called an emergency meeting before Issei had even finished changing out of his school uniform. He arrived at the clubroom to find the mood entirely different from the cautious, methodical calm of the previous days. Sona was already there, standing rigid beside Rias's desk, and the tension in the room was thick enough to taste. What happened? Issei asked, though something in his gut already suspected the answer. A Gremory operative crossed into Ko territory an hour ago, Sona said without preamble. Unauthorized, unannounced, and moving directly toward the old cathedral district. Do we know who? Rias asked. A cadre agent, Sona said. Low profile enough that they are not one of Azazel's inner circle, but skilled enough that my scouts lost visual twice before finally confirming the trajectory. Whoever they are, they know exactly where they are going. Akeno's expression had gone hard and focused, the playful warmth entirely absent. Straight to the cathedral. That is not a coincidence. No, Rias agreed. It is not. Issei felt the golden light beneath his skin stir faintly, as though it too had noticed a shift in the air, some old instinct sharpening in response to a threat it recognized before he did. What does Gremory want with an empty church? They want to confirm what their instruments detected 3 nights ago, Sona said. And if this agent finds residual traces of whatever sealed itself out from beneath that altar, the next visitor to Ko will not be a lone cadre scout. It will be someone with the authority to make demands. Rias stood, already reaching for her jacket. We intercept before they find anything conclusive. Quietly, if possible. I would rather resolve this as a misunderstanding between allied factions than as an incident that requires formal diplomatic channels. I'm coming, Issei said immediately. Issei, wait. It's about me, he said, more firmly than he usually spoke to her. Whatever this thing wants, whatever it's looking for, it's tied to what's inside me now. I should be there. Rias studied him for a long moment, weighing the risk against the truth of what he'd said, and finally gave a short, reluctant nod. You stay behind me. If this becomes a fight, you let the rest of us handle the combat unless there is no other option. We do not yet know how your power reacts under real pressure, and I am not willing to find out in front of a Gregory agent who might report every detail straight back to the Governor General. Understood. They moved quickly through the darkening streets, Rias, Akeno, Issei, and Kaneko, with Sona coordinating from a distance through a small communication circle tucked into her sleeve, her own students spread thin across the district's perimeter in case the situation escalated beyond what a small strike team could handle. Asia had wanted to come as well, but Rias had asked her to stay behind at the school, ready to heal whoever came back needing it, and Asia had accepted the assignment with the quiet, steady resolve she always brought to the roles she was given even when they weren't the ones she wanted. The cathedral looked exactly as broken and abandoned as it had the night everything changed, moonlight spilling through the same shattered windows, the same overgrown courtyard leading up to the same ruined doorway. But standing just inside that doorway, cloaked in dark feathers that shimmered faintly violet in the moonlight, was a figure who had clearly not expected company. The fallen angel turned at the sound of their approach, unhurried, almost amused. He was young-looking, sharp-featured, with a single set of black wings folded loosely behind him and an air of someone who had talked his way out of worse situations than this one. Gremory, he said, inclining his head with just enough mockery to make the gesture an insult. And friends. This is quite the welcoming committee for a scout who was only sightseeing. You are standing on Gremory territory without authorization, Rias said, her voice cold and level. I would like to know why. Curiosity, the fallen angel said easily. Something interesting happened here a few nights ago. Interesting enough that half of Gregory's detection network lit up like a festival. You will forgive me for wanting a closer look before someone with actual authority decides to make it their business. His gaze slid past Rias, past Akeno, and settled directly on Issei, lingering there with the focused, calculating interest of someone who had just found exactly what he came looking for. Ah, he said softly, and smiled in a way that made the golden light beneath Issei's skin flare an instinctive warning. There you are. Akeno stepped forward before anyone else could react, lightning already crackling faintly along her fingertips, her expression sharp enough to cut. You will not come any closer. Relax, the fallen angel said, raising both hands in a gesture of exaggerated peace that didn't quite reach his eyes. I am not here to start a war between factions over one human boy, however interesting he might have suddenly become. I am here to look, report, and leave. That is the whole assignment. Then look somewhere else, Rias said. I would love to, he said, except that I already found what I was sent to find, and my superiors are going to want details rather than a shrug and an apology. His eyes stayed fixed on Issei, curious and calculating in a way that made the boy's skin crawl. Tell me, Red Dragon Emperor, do you even know what you are carrying? Because from where I am standing, that light under your skin does not look like anything native to this era. Wouldn't you like to know, Issei said, trying for confidence and mostly landing on stubbornness. I would, actually, the fallen angel said, and something shifted in his posture, the casual ease dropping away all at once. Which is why I am going to need a sample. He moved fast, faster than Issei expected from someone who had spent the last minute talking like he had all the time in the world. A spear of condensed light formed in his hand and hurtled toward Issei in a blur, not aimed to kill, Issei realized in the half-second he had to process it, but aimed to wound, to force a reaction, to see exactly what the golden power inside him would do under real threat. Rias moved to intercept, a wall of destruction magic rising between Issei and the spear, but the fallen angel had clearly anticipated exactly that response. The spear split apart mid-flight into 3 smaller projectiles, one curving around Rias's barrier entirely, angling straight for the gap where Issei stood exposed. Issei didn't think. He reacted, the golden light along his arm flaring bright and instinctive, rising between himself and the incoming light spear without any conscious decision on his part. The spear struck the golden barrier and simply stopped, hanging suspended in the air for one impossible frozen moment, exactly the way the stray devil had hung frozen days earlier, before it unraveled into harmless motes of fading light and drifted away like ash. The fallen angel's eyes went wide. Fascinating, he breathed, and for a moment the casual mockery was entirely gone, replaced by something closer to genuine, hungry curiosity. You really are carrying a piece of something ancient. Do you have any idea how long it has been since anyone has seen power like that outside of old texts nobody in Gregory even believes anymore? Enough, Rias said, her own power gathering in a dense, dangerous cloud of crimson around her hands. This encounter ends now, or it ends with a formal complaint to the Governor-General about an unauthorized incursion and an unprovoked attack on a member of my peerage. The threat landed. The fallen angel's expression shifted, calculation returning behind his eyes as he weighed the value of what he'd already learned against the political cost of escalating further. Slowly, deliberately, he let the remaining light around his hands dissipate, and folded his wings back into a more relaxed posture. No need to involve Azazel just yet, he said. I got what I came for. A confirmation, and a very interesting report to bring home. His gaze flicked back to Issei one last time, something almost respectful in it now. For what it is worth, kid, I would be careful. You have just become the single most interesting thing to happen in this region in centuries, and not everyone who comes looking for you is going to be as reasonable as I am. Is that supposed to be a threat? Issei asked. It is supposed to be a warning, the fallen angel said, already stepping backward toward the shadows gathering at the edge of the courtyard. There is a difference. Take care of yourself, Red Dragon Emperor. Something tells me the next few months are going to be very complicated for you. He vanished into the darkness, his presence fading from Sona's tracking circle within seconds, leaving the cathedral courtyard silent except for the wind moving through broken stone. Rias let out a long breath, the tension in her shoulders easing only slightly. That went better than it could have, she said, and significantly worse than I wanted. He knows what I am now, Issei said quietly, looking down at his arm where the golden light had finally begun to dim back to its usual quiet pulse. Gregory suspected before tonight, Rias said. Now they have confirmation, which means Azazel will hear a full report within the day, and depending on how curious he is feeling, we may have a much more serious visitor arriving sooner than any of us would like. She turned to face Issei directly, her crimson eyes steady despite everything. But you protected yourself tonight without hurting anyone unnecessarily. That barrier was controlled. Precise. Whatever is inside you, it responded exactly the way it needed to, and nothing more. I didn't even think about it, Issei admitted. It just happened. That is either very reassuring, Akeno said, echoing her own words from days earlier with a faint, tired smile, or extremely concerning. Let's go with reassuring tonight, Kaneko said quietly, speaking up for the first time since the confrontation began. We have had enough concerning for 1 week. Nobody argued with her. They walked back through the quiet streets of Ko together, the 4 of them, moonlight silvering the rooftops around them, and Issei found himself glancing at Rias's steady profile, at Akeno's watchful eyes still scanning the shadows out of old habit, at Kaneko's quiet, solid presence beside him, and felt something settle inside him that wasn't quite peace but was close enough to matter. Somewhere far behind them, back in the ruined cathedral where an ancient god had chosen him without asking permission, the wind moved through broken stone and empty pews, and the last traces of golden light finally faded from the cracked stone floor entirely, leaving no proof at all that anything unusual had ever happened there, except for the boy now walking away from it, carrying something old and patient, and quietly waiting inside his chest for whatever came next. Back at the school, Asia was waiting at the clubroom door, and the moment she saw Issei walking toward her, whole and unharmed, The relief on her face was so open and unguarded that he felt his own worry finally start to unwind. She crossed the courtyard at a near run and stopped just short of throwing her arms around him, catching herself at the last second with a flustered, apologetic look. "You are all right," she said instead, breathless. "I felt something through our connection, something sharp and frightening, and then it was gone, and I did not know what had happened until now." "I'm okay," Issei said gently. "We're all okay. I am glad," Asia said, and this time she did not stop herself, closing the last small distance between them and wrapping her arms carefully around him, as though he might still be fragile beneath the surface no matter how steady he looked. "I do not think I could bear it if something happened to you." Rias watched the two of them for a moment, something complicated and warm passing behind her eyes, before she cleared her throat and gestured everyone back inside. "We have a great deal to discuss," she said. "And considerably less time than I would like to figure it all out." They filed back into the clubroom together, the night still heavy with everything that had happened and everything still waiting to unfold, and none of them noticed the faint golden shimmer that traced itself once more across the sky above Ko, patient and ancient, and no longer entirely alone in the world it had finally chosen to wake up in. The days that followed the cathedral confrontation settled into something Issei almost mistook for normalcy, though he knew better than to trust it. Word had not yet come down from Gregory about any formal response, and Sona's scouts reported no further incursions into Ko territory, but Rias had grown noticeably more careful, scheduling training sessions earlier, keeping the club's movements less predictable, and insisting that at least 2 people accompany Issei anywhere off school grounds. It was during one of those quieter evenings, the club room lit only by a single desk lamp while everyone else had gone home, that Issei found himself alone with Rias for the first time since everything had started. "You should be resting," she said, not looking up from the old text spread across her desk, fragments of the Gremory archive she had been slowly translating with the help of a decoding charm borrowed from her brother's personal library. "Couldn't sleep," Issei admitted, settling into the chair across from her. "Kept thinking about what that fallen angel said. About how I'm the most interesting thing to happen around here in centuries." "He was trying to unsettle you," Rias said. "It is a common tactic. Make the target anxious, and anxious people make mistakes. Did it work?" Rias finally looked up, and something in her expression softened at whatever she saw in his face. "A little," she admitted. "Not because I think you will make a mistake, but because I do not like the idea of every faction with an interest in ancient power circling closer to someone I care about." The words hung in the air between them, simple and direct in a way Rias rarely allowed herself to be. Issei felt his chest tighten in a way that had nothing to do with fear. "I never wanted this," he said quietly. "Any of it. Not the boosted gear, not this new thing, none of it. I just wanted to protect people. That's all I ever wanted, since the day I found out what I actually was." "I know," Rias said. "That is precisely why I do not regret bringing you into my peerage, even now, even with everything this has become. Power like yours, offered to someone who only ever wanted to use it for the right reasons, is rare enough that I would fight the entire underworld to keep you exactly who you are. Even if it means fighting Gregory too?" "Even then," Rias said, without a moment's hesitation. Issei found himself studying her in the lamplight, the tired determination in her crimson eyes, the quiet steel beneath every careful, deliberate word she spoke. He had known Rias Gremory for 2 years now, had fought beside her, trained under her, watched her carry the weight of an entire peerage's safety on her shoulders without ever once letting it show unless she chose to, and in this quiet moment, stripped of urgency and danger, he found himself noticing things about her he had always known but rarely allowed himself to sit with. "Thank you," he said finally, "for not giving up on me. Even when this whole thing makes me a bigger target than I've ever been." Rias set down the ancient text she had been studying and reached across the desk, resting her hand over his where it lay against the worn wood. "You are not a burden, Issei. You never have been. If anything, you have made this peerage stronger simply by being exactly who you are, stubborn and reckless, and utterly incapable of walking away from someone who needs help." Her thumb traced a small, absent circle across his knuckles. "Whatever Aurelian turns out to be, whatever it wants from you, I intend to make certain that you remain the one making the choices, not the power inside you, and not anyone who thinks they have the right to claim you because of it. The moment stretched, warm and quiet, before Rias seemed to catch herself and withdrew her hand with a small, self-conscious clearing of her throat, returning her attention to the scattered texts with slightly more focus than the material strictly required. Get some rest, she said, though her voice had lost its earlier crispness. Tomorrow I want to try something new in training. If Sona's read on the aura is correct, and this power really does function more like a key than a weapon, I want to understand what it might be capable of unlocking, before someone else decides to test that theory for us. Yes, ma'am, Issei said, standing, though he lingered a moment longer at the doorway. Rias? Yes? Whatever happens with all this, he said, I'm glad it's you and the others figuring it out with me. I don't think I could handle it any other way. Rias allowed herself a small, genuine smile, the kind she rarely showed anyone outside her closest circle. Neither could I, she said. Now go home before Asia worries herself sick wondering why you are not answering your phone. He laughed, some of the day's weight finally lifting, and left her there in the soft lamplight, bent once more over records of a war fought so long ago that even the gods who survived it had mostly forgotten why it started. What neither of them noticed, tucked deep within the oldest and most damaged fragment of text on her desk, was a single faded illustration depicting a circle of golden light surrounded by 7 smaller figures, their forms too worn by centuries to make out clearly, save for one detail that had somehow survived the passage of time entirely intact. Every one of those 7 smaller figures was reaching toward the golden light at the circle's center, not in fear, and not in worship, but in the unmistakable posture of people choosing, of their own will, to stand beside something the rest of the world had once decided was too dangerous to be allowed to exist. Rias would not notice the detail until much later. By then, it would already mean something entirely different to her than it might have meant that quiet, ordinary evening in the clubroom, back when the hardest part of the entire ordeal still seemed to be convincing Issei to actually go home and sleep. The new training exercise Rias had promised began the following evening in the underground chamber, but this time she brought Sona along as well, along with a small device her friend had borrowed from the student council's private collection, a squat brass instrument etched with runes that hummed faintly the moment it was placed on the floor near Issei. It is a resonance gauge, Sona explained, adjusting a dial along its side. Old Citri family technology, originally designed to measure the compatibility between a devil and an evil piece before a reincarnation. I have modified it slightly. It should tell us more about what kind of power is actually inside you, rather than simply confirming that something is. Sounds official, Issei said, eyeing the device warily. It will not hurt, Asia added reassuringly, standing close by with her hands already glowing faintly in case anything went wrong. I checked the enchantment myself before Sona Kaicho brought it down here. Good enough for me, Issei said, and held his arm out over the device as instructed. The golden light beneath his skin responded almost immediately to the rune's hum, threads of pale light curling down from his forearm toward the brass casing like curious tendrils exploring something new. The device's needle spun wildly for a moment before settling, and a soft chime rang out as characters etched along its rim began to glow one by one. Sona studied the readout with the focused intensity she brought to everything, her glasses catching the golden light. This is remarkable, she murmured. The resonance pattern does not match any known category. Not devil, not angel, not fallen, not even the handful of primordial signatures documented in the Citri family's private research. It is registering as something the device's original design never accounted for at all. Which means what, exactly? Rias asked. Which means, Sona said, straightening, that whatever Aurelian actually is, it predates the classification systems every faction currently uses to define power. We are not looking at an unusually strong devil, or an unusually old fallen angel artifact. We are looking at something that existed before the concept of factions as we understand them even existed. Akeno let out a low whistle. That is either the coolest thing I have heard all week, or the single most terrifying. Both, probably, Kaneko said quietly, arms crossed as she watched the golden threads swirl lazily around the humming device. Issei felt a familiar prickle of nerves crawl up the back of his neck, the same feeling he always got right before something important was about to be decided without his input. Can you ask it something for me, he said, focusing inward toward the calm, patient presence that had settled somewhere beneath Drake's dormant awareness. Ask it what it actually wants. Not what it can do. What it wants. The golden light pulsed once, slow and deliberate, and this time when the voice spoke, it was not only in Issei's mind. It rippled outward, faint but audible, carried on the resonance the device had stirred awake, so that everyone in the chamber heard it at once, low and ancient and strangely gentle. I want what I wanted before I was sealed away. I want to see whether the world learned anything from the mistakes that led to the severance, or whether it simply forgot, and is destined to repeat them regardless of what any of us do. The chamber fell utterly silent. Even Sona's brass device had gone quiet, its needle steady now, as though it too was listening. That's not really an answer, Issei said carefully. It is the only honest one I have, the voice replied. I have slept beneath that cathedral for longer than any of you can properly measure. I do not know this world anymore. I do not know its wars, its alliances, its fears. All I know is that I chose you, wounded and stubborn as you were, because something in you reminded me of the reason I fought at all, before everything I fought for decided I had become too dangerous to keep around. And if the world hasn't changed? Rias asked quietly, stepping forward. If it decides the same thing about you again? There was a long pause before the voice answered, and when it did, something in its tone had shifted, weary and old and, for the first time, unmistakably sad. Then I hope, this time, there will at least be someone willing to stand beside me before that decision is made. Last time, there was no one. Nobody in the room spoke for a long moment. Issei felt the weight of that admission settle over him, heavier somehow than any of the danger or politics or looming threats from Gregory. He thought of Akeno's quiet confession days earlier, about being caught between two worlds that only wanted the useful parts of her. He thought of Asia, cast out of the only home she had ever known for the simple crime of helping someone the church had decided did not deserve help. He thought of himself, an ordinary human boy who had never asked to carry a dragon, let alone an ancient forgotten god, and who had somehow ended up surrounded anyway by people who refused to let him carry any of it alone. You're not alone this time, Issei said quietly, and meant it completely. Whatever happens. I promise you that much. The golden light along his arm flared once, warm and bright, and for the briefest moment the entire chamber seemed to fill with something that felt almost like relief, ancient and patient, and finally, after so very long, no longer entirely without hope. Rias watched the exchange with an expression Issei couldn't quite read, something between wonder and quiet resolve, before she turned to address the rest of the room. We have a great deal of work ahead of us, she said. Understanding this power fully. Preparing for whatever Gregory decides to do with the report that fallen angel carried home. Making certain that whoever comes looking for Aurelian finds a peerage ready to stand its ground rather than an easy target. And if the church gets involved too? Kiba asked. Or the underworld? Then we handle that as it comes, Rias said, crimson eyes steady and certain in the dim chamber light. Together. The same way we have handled everything else. Asia moved to stand beside Issei, her small hand finding his without hesitation, and Akeno settled on his other side a moment later with her usual easy confidence, though something warmer than teasing lingered behind her violet eyes tonight. Kaneko gave a small, approving nod from across the room, and even Kiba allowed himself a faint, steady smile. Issei looked around at all of them, at the strange, stubborn, fiercely loyal family he had somehow found himself part of, and felt the golden light beneath his skin settle into something calmer than it had been since the night everything began, as though it too understood, finally, that it had not simply chosen a vessel 3 nights ago beneath a broken cathedral. It had chosen a home. Above the school, the night sky stretched wide and quiet over Ko, ordinary and unremarkable to anyone who did not know to look closer, while far beyond the town's borders, in places where old grudges and older powers had never entirely finished settling their accounts, the news of an awakened primordial god was already beginning to travel, carried on whispered reports and hurried summoning circles, toward ears that would not rest easy until they understood exactly what had been sleeping beneath Ko, and exactly what it now intended to do with the second chance it had somehow, against every possible expectation, been given. The summons arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered not by messenger but by a circle of black feathered light that unfolded itself across the clubroom floor before anyone had even finished their first cup of tea. Rias recognized the seal instantly, and the color drained slightly from her face as she watched it resolve into the shape of a folded letter resting on the carpet. "That is Gregory's formal seal," she said quietly, picking it up. "Not a scout's seal. This came directly from the Governor-General's office." Akeno set down her cup with careful precision. "Azazel himself." Rias broke the seal and read in silence for a long moment, her expression unreadable, before she looked up at the room. "He is requesting a meeting. Diplomatic terms, neutral ground, 3 days from now. He wants to discuss, and I am quoting directly, an item of mutual interest that recently surfaced within Co territory." "An item," Issei repeated flatly. "That's me. I'm the item." "You are the item," Rias confirmed, folding the letter closed with more force than necessary. "He is being careful with his language because he knows this letter will be read by more than just me. If word of this reaches the Underworld's ruling council before I have had a chance to manage the situation myself, things could become significantly more complicated." "Can you refuse the meeting?" Asia asked, her voice small with worry. "Not without consequences," Rias said. "Azazel has been unusually restrained where Ko is concerned, largely out of respect for the peace between our factions. If I refuse an official diplomatic request from him directly, it sends a message that I have something to hide, which will only make him more determined to find out what it is. So we go," Akeno said simply. "All of us. Together." Rias nodded slowly. "All of us. On my terms, at a location I choose, with every protection I can reasonably arrange beforehand." She looked at Issei directly, crimson eyes steady despite the tension around them. "This is not a trap. Azazel does not need to trap anyone. He simply wants information, and he has more patience than almost anyone I have ever negotiated with. That patience is what worries me most. He will not rush, and he will not threaten, and by the end of the conversation he will likely know exactly as much about you as he intended to learn before he ever sent this letter." "Great," Issei muttered. "So basically I'm walking into a conversation I've already lost." "Not lost," Rias corrected. "Managed differently than you are used to. Azazel respects strength, and he respects honesty even more, strangely enough for someone who leads an organization built partly on secrets. If you go into that meeting frightened and evasive, he will read it as weakness and press harder. If you go in steady, and answer what you are willing to answer while holding back what you are not, he will respect the boundary far more than you might expect." Issei considered that, turning the golden light beneath his sleeve over in his mind like a question he still hadn't found the right way to ask. "Okay," he said finally. "Steady. I can do steady." "You will need to," Rias said, "because in the meantime, we have 3 days to prepare. And there is something else I need to show all of you first." She crossed to her desk and retrieved the old, damaged text she had been poring over for the better part of a week, laying it open carefully to a page near its center. The illustration there had faded badly with age, but the shapes were still visible enough to make out a circle of golden light at the center of the page, surrounded by 7 smaller figures, each reaching toward it. "I found this 2 nights ago," Rias said. "Buried in a section of the archive dealing with the original Severance conflict. I could not translate the accompanying text fully, the language predates even the oldest devil scripts I have access to, but the imagery is unmistakable. 7 figures, gathered around a primordial light, standing beside it rather than fleeing from it or worshipping it. 7, Akeno repeated, glancing instinctively around the room, at herself, at Asia, at Kaneko and Kiba near the door, at Rias, and finally back at Issei. That is an oddly specific number." "I do not yet know what it means," Rias admitted. "It could be nothing more than an artist's flourish from 1,000 years ago. Or it could mean that whatever Aurelian is, it was never meant to be carried by one person alone." She glanced at Issei. "Has it said anything to you about this? About needing more than a single vessel?" Issei reached inward, past the quiet golden warmth that had become almost familiar to him now, and asked. The answer came slowly, thoughtful. careful in a way that told him even Aurelian wasn't entirely certain of its own answer. I do not remember everything clearly, the voice said. But I remember that I was never alone before the severance. I remember standing beside others who chose to stay, even when staying became dangerous. Whether that memory means what your illustration suggests, I cannot promise you. Old gods forget as easily as they remember. Sometimes more easily. Issei relayed the answer, and the room fell quiet, everyone processing the implications in their own way. Asia's fingers had curled slightly into the fabric of her skirt, an old, unconscious habit from her days in the church whenever a conversation touched on something she didn't fully understand but instinctively sensed was important. Akeno's expression had gone thoughtful, almost searching, as though she were quietly measuring herself against an illustration 1,000 years old. Whatever it means, Rias finally said, closing the book gently, it is a mystery for another day. Right now, our priority is surviving a diplomatic meeting with the leader of the fallen angels without giving away more than we intend to. Everything else can wait until after. Can it, though? Issei asked quietly, glancing at Asia, at Akeno, feeling something shift and settle in his chest that he didn't yet have words for. Feels like it might matter a lot, actually. Rias met his eyes, and for just a moment, something in her expression softened into an understanding that went beyond strategy and diplomacy entirely. It matters, she agreed. Just not more than keeping you safe long enough to figure out what it means. One crisis at a time, Issei. We will get to the rest. 2 nights before the meeting with Azazel, Rias called Issei to the archive room alone, a small, dust-filled space tucked behind the old-school building where the Gremory family kept the physical texts too fragile or too sensitive to digitize. She had been spending most of her evenings there, and when Issei arrived he found her sitting cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by fragile scrolls and yellowed pages, looking smaller and more tired than he had ever seen her. You wanted to see me? He asked, settling carefully onto the floor across from her, mindful of the ancient documents scattered between them. I wanted company, Rias admitted, surprising him with the honesty of it. And I wanted to show you something before the meeting tomorrow, in case it helps you understand what we might be walking into. She slid a scroll toward him, its surface so old that the ink had faded to a pale brown, barely legible even in the room's careful lighting. This is a partial account of the severance itself, written by a devil scholar roughly 6 centuries after the war ended. Most of it is speculation, second-hand stories passed down through generations, but there is a passage here that I think you should read. Issei leaned forward, squinting at the faded script until Rias gently took the scroll back and read it aloud instead, her voice quiet and careful in the hushed room. It is said that the primordial gods did not resist their sealing, she read. That the eldest among them, the one called only the Light Before Names, went willingly into its prison, believing that a world unable to trust what it did not understand would only destroy itself trying to control what it feared. It asked, before the seal closed, only one thing of those who bound it. That should the world ever grow wise enough to choose partnership over fear, they would let it try again. The room fell quiet. Issei felt something tighten in his chest, an ache that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with the weight of what he had just heard. You think that's Aurelian, he said softly. The Light Before Names. I do not know, Rias admitted. The name is not an exact match to anything Aurelian has told you directly. But the sentiment feels familiar, does it not? Going willingly. Believing the world simply was not ready yet. She set the scroll down carefully. I wanted you to see this before tomorrow, because I think it matters, that whatever is inside you did not fight the world that sealed it away. It only ever asked for a second chance. Issei thought of Aurelian's voice in the training chamber days earlier, tired and old and unmistakably sad. I hope, this time, there will at least be someone willing to stand beside me before that decision is made. Last time, there was no one. It's been waiting this whole time, Issei said quietly. Not for power. Not for revenge. Just for someone to actually give it a chance. Yes, Rias said. And I think that is precisely why it chose you, out of everyone it could have reached that night. Because it needed someone who would not simply use what it offered, but who would actually choose to stand beside it in return. She looked at him then, something soft and unguarded in her expression. Which is exactly what you have been doing, whether you fully realized it or not. Issei felt a warmth spread through his chest that had nothing to do with the golden light beneath his skin. I didn't think about it that way, he admitted. I just figured I should treat it decently, since it saved my life and didn't ask for anything in return. That is precisely the kind of thoughtless kindness that makes you exactly who you are, Rias said, a small, fond smile tugging at her lips. And precisely why I have never once regretted bringing you into my peerage, even when it means facing down Gregory and an ancient organization of god hunters in the same month. Issei laughed despite himself, some of the heaviness in the room finally easing. When you put it like that, it sounds like a lot. It is a lot, Rias agreed, laughing softly along with him. But I would not trade it. Any of it. Not the danger, not the uncertainty, not even the headaches you have personally given me over the last 2 years. She reached out and squeezed his hand gently. I meant what I told you before. Whatever comes next, we face it together. That includes tomorrow, and it includes whatever the choir decides to do about all of this, whenever they finally show themselves. They sat together a while longer in the quiet archive room, the fragile old scrolls scattered around them like fragments of a history slowly being rewritten, and when Issei finally rose to leave for the night, Rias walked him to the door, her hand lingering briefly on his arm. Get some sleep, she said softly. Tomorrow will require every bit of steadiness you have. I will, Issei promised. Good night, Rias. Good night, Issei, she said, and watched him go with an expression that lingered somewhere between quiet worry and something warmer, something she was not yet ready to name even to herself, long after the sound of his footsteps had faded down the darkened hallway. The 3 days before the meeting passed in a blur of preparation. Rias spent hours on secured communication circles with her brother Surzex, carefully framing the situation in terms that would keep the Gremory household informed without triggering an official underworld investigation. Sona coordinated additional wards around the neutral meeting site, an old tea house on the outskirts of Ko that had hosted faction negotiations before, its grounds soaked in enough protective enchantment to make any sudden aggression from either side extremely costly. Issei, for his part, spent most of those 3 days training with Akeno and Asia, trying to find some kind of stability in the golden power that still occasionally surprised him with what it could do. Again, Akeno said, standing across the training chamber with lightning crackling faintly along her fingers, not enough to hurt, just enough to test his reflexes. Do not think about it. Just react. Issei let the lightning come, and the golden shield rose instinctively along his forearm, catching the small bolt and unraveling it into harmless sparks before it could reach him. He was getting faster at it, more natural, though it still left him faintly winded every time, as though the power borrowed something from him with each use, however small. Better, Akeno said, lowering her hand. You barely flinched that time. I've had a lot of practice flinching lately, Issei admitted, wiping sweat from his brow. Feels good to finally stop doing it. Asia approached from the side of the chamber where she had been watching, her small hands glowing faintly as she prepared to check him over out of habit more than necessity at this point. You are improving so quickly, she said, warmth evident in her voice. A week ago you could barely call the light on command. Now you are catching Akeno-sen's lightning without even thinking about it. I had good teachers, Issei said, and meant it. Akeno's expression shifted into something softer, less playful than usual. You know, she said, watching you learn to trust that power instead of fearing it, it reminds me of something. When I first came to live with Rias, I could barely control my own abilities either. Every time I called on my lightning, some part of me was terrified it would remind everyone around me of my fallen angel blood, and that they would look at me the way people used to look at me before. Akeno, that's a lot to carry. Let me finish, she said, holding up a hand with a small, wry smile. My point is, it was Rias who taught me the same thing I am now trying to teach you. That power is not something to be ashamed of, or something to hide, or something that defines you against your will. It is simply a part of you, and the only thing that actually matters is what you choose to do with it. She reached out and lightly tapped the golden light still faintly visible beneath his sleeve. You are already doing that. Choosing well. I am proud of you, for whatever that is worth, Issei felt something warm settle in his chest at her words, something that had nothing to do with exhaustion or the strain of training. It's worth a lot, he said quietly. Thank you. Asia had been listening with quiet attentiveness, and when Akeno stepped back to grab a water bottle, she moved a little closer, her expression thoughtful. Issei-san, she said. Can I tell you something I have never told anyone else in the club, not even Bucho? Of course. When I was cast out of the church, Asia said, her voice soft but steady, I believed, for a long time, that I had been abandoned because there was something fundamentally wrong with me. That healing a devil had proven I was never truly holy at all, only pretending to be, and that everyone who had once cared for me had simply been waiting to discover the truth. She looked down at her glowing hands. It took me a long time to understand that healing someone in need was never the wrong choice. That the people who cast me out were wrong, not me. Asia, you don't have to tell me this. I want to, she said gently, cutting him off with the same quiet resolve she always carried when something mattered enough to push through her own hesitance. Because I think you might be feeling something similar right now. Afraid that this power inside you makes you dangerous, or wrong, or too complicated for the people around you to want to keep caring about. And I want you to know that is not true. Whatever Aurelian is, it does not change who you are to me. It never will. Issei looked at her, at the quiet, unwavering certainty in her pale eyes, and felt something in his chest tighten in a way he didn't fully have words for yet. Thank you, he said softly. That means more than you probably realize. Asia's cheeks colored slightly, but she held his gaze anyway. I mean it, she said. Every word. Across the chamber, Rias had entered partway through the conversation, though she had lingered by the doorway rather than interrupt, watching the exchange with an expression that was difficult to read even for someone who had known her as long as Issei had. When she finally stepped forward, her voice was brisk and businesslike, though something warmer lingered beneath it. The meeting is tomorrow evening, she said. I want everyone rested and ready. Azazel has a reputation for reading people quickly, and I would rather he see a calm, unified peerage than a group of exhausted teenagers who have been training themselves into the ground for 3 straight days. Yes, Bucho, Akeno said, though her eyes lingered on Issei and Asia a moment longer, something quietly satisfied in her expression that she didn't bother to hide. That night, as Issei walked home through the quiet streets of Ko with Akeno on one side and Asia on the other, the weight of tomorrow's meeting pressing steadily closer, he found himself thinking less about Azazel and Grigori, and the danger circling ever nearer, and more about the 2 girls walking silently beside him, and the strange, steady warmth that had settled into his chest somewhere over the last few days, quiet and certain, and entirely separate from the golden light still pulsing gently beneath his skin. Whatever tomorrow brought, he thought, he would not be facing it alone. And for the first time since the cathedral floor had cracked open beneath him, that thought alone was enough to make the fear feel smaller than it had any right to be. The tea house sat at the edge of a quiet wooded district, its traditional architecture at odds with the sheer density of protective wards humming invisibly around its perimeter. Rias arrived early with her full peerage in tow, dressed formally, every movement measured and deliberate as she inspected the grounds one final time before the appointed hour. Remember, she said quietly to Issei as they waited in the tea house's central room, seated across a low table from an empty cushion that would soon hold one of the most powerful beings in the supernatural world. Steady. Honest where you can be. Quiet where you cannot. Steady, Issei repeated. Got it. Azazel arrived precisely on time, which Rias later admitted was itself a kind of message, punctuality as a show of respect rather than urgency. He looked younger than Issei had expected for someone who led an entire faction, dressed casually despite the formality of the occasion, his golden eyes sharp with an intelligence that immediately made the whole room feel smaller. Rias Gremory, he said, settling onto the cushion with easy familiarity, as though this were a social call rather than a diplomatic negotiation. It has been a while. You have grown into quite the capable young lady since I last saw you causing trouble at your brother's side, Governor General, Rias said, inclining her head with careful respect. Thank you for agreeing to neutral ground. Of course, Azazel said. I have no interest in escalating anything unnecessarily. I am simply curious. His gaze shifted to Issei, unhurried, thorough, the way a scholar might examine an interesting specimen rather than the way a predator might examine prey. So this is the Red Dragon Emperor everyone has been whispering about. You look remarkably ordinary for someone carrying around a piece of forgotten history. I get that a lot, Issei said, and was relieved when it came out steadier than he felt. Azazel's mouth curved into something that might have been amusement. My scout's report was thorough, but reports are never quite the same as seeing something firsthand. Would you mind if I asked you a few questions directly? I promise none of them are traps, though I understand if you do not fully believe that yet. Ask, Issei said. I'll answer what I can. Fair enough. Azazel folded his hands together, considering. What does it feel like? The power. Not the effects, I have already seen a description of those. I mean the presence of it. Does it feel like an intruder in your body, or something closer to a companion? Issei thought about that honestly before answering. Closer to a companion, I guess. It doesn't fight me for control or anything like that. It's just there. Patient. Like it's waiting to see what I decide to do with it before it decides what it thinks of me. Interesting, Azazel said, and something in his sharp golden eyes shifted, genuine curiosity replacing whatever calculation had come before it. That tracks with the old texts, if the fragments I have access to are even remotely accurate. The primordials sealed during the severance were never described as hostile, only as too powerful to safely coexist with the newer factions at the time. Power without malice is, in its own way, far more unpredictable than power that simply wants to conquer something. It is much harder to plan around. Are you planning around it? Rias asked, her tone carefully neutral. I am considering my options, Azazel said honestly, which Issei suspected was more candor than most diplomatic conversations offered. Gregory has no interest in destroying something that predates our entire understanding of divine and demonic power. Frankly, the scholar in me finds the idea appalling. But I also cannot pretend that an unbound primordial god sitting quietly in the middle of devil territory does not concern certain factions far less patient than myself. Such as? Rias pressed. Azazel's expression sobered slightly. The Church, for one, though their interest so far has been theological rather than tactical, which buys you some time. And there are older organizations, ones that predate even the Church's current structure, groups that were directly responsible for orchestrating the original sealing of every primordial from that era. If any of them still exist in a form capable of acting, they will not approach this the way I have. The room went quiet at that. Issei felt the golden light beneath his sleeve pulse once, faint and watchful, as though even Aurelian had reacted to the mention of whoever had once sealed it away. Do you have a name for these organizations? Rias asked carefully. Fragments of one, Azazel said. An old term that shows up in a handful of surviving texts from that era. The choir. I do not know if it still exists in any meaningful capacity after so many centuries, and I would not want to alarm you over something that may well be nothing more than history at this point. But given how quickly your particular situation has already drawn attention, I would not rule it out either. Rias's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Thank you for the warning. I am not here to threaten you, Rias, Azazel said, his tone softening slightly. I am genuinely fond of you, and I have no interest in seeing a promising young devil and her peerage destroyed by something none of you asked to be part of. Consider this meeting a gesture of goodwill. Gregory will not act against your territory or against the boy carrying that power, so long as nothing changes to make that position untenable. And if something does change? Issei asked quietly. Azazel regarded him with an expression that was, for the first time, entirely without amusement. Then I hope, for everyone's sake, that whatever is inside you turns out to be exactly as patient and thoughtful as you claim it feels. Because I promise you, boy, not everyone circling this situation is going to give you the courtesy of a conversation before they decide what to do about you. The meeting concluded shortly after, cordial on the surface, though the weight of Azazel's warning lingered heavily over the walk back to the school. Issei found himself glancing at Rias's tense profile, at Akeno's watchful silence, at Asia's quiet worry, and felt the golden light beneath his skin settle into something that felt, for the first time, less like curiosity and more like recognition, as though somewhere deep inside him, Aurelian had just remembered exactly who the choir had once been, and exactly why it had been so afraid of them in the first place. Back in the clubroom that night, Rias paced in front of her desk while the rest of the peerage settled into an uneasy silence around her. The mention of the choir had unsettled her more than she was willing to say outright, though the tight set of her shoulders and the sharp, restless energy in her movements told the story clearly enough. I need to search the archive again, she said, mostly to herself. If the choir was ever documented anywhere in Gremory records, it would be buried in the oldest sections, the parts even my mother rarely accessed. Bucho, Akeno said gently, you have barely slept in days. The archive will still be there in the morning. I know, Rias said, though she didn't stop pacing. I simply do not like the idea of an organization capable of sealing an entire generation of primordial gods still operating somewhere out there, unaccounted for, while Issei walks around Ko with a piece of exactly the kind of power they were built to destroy. Issei watched her, the tension radiating off her small frame, and felt a familiar, uncomfortable guilt settle back into his chest. Rias, he said quietly. You should rest. I'll be fine tonight. We've got wards, we've got each other, nothing is going to happen in the next few hours that can't wait until morning. Rias stopped pacing and looked at him, something complicated passing behind her crimson eyes. You are worried about me, she said, not quite a question. Kind of hard not to be, Issei said. You've been carrying this whole situation practically by yourself since the night it started. Negotiating with Azazel, digging through ancient texts, managing Sona, managing all of us. You're allowed to be tired, you know. You're allowed to let someone else carry part of it for a while. Something in Rias's expression softened, the sharp, restless energy finally easing out of her shoulders. I am not used to that, she admitted quietly. Letting others carry things for me. As the heir to the Gremory household, I have spent most of my life being told that the burdens of leadership are mine alone to bear, that showing weakness in front of those who depend on me is a failure of duty. That sounds exhausting, Issei said honestly. Rias let out a short, surprised laugh, some of the tension breaking with it. It is, actually. Thank you for noticing. She crossed the room and settled onto the couch beside him, closer than strictly necessary, the exhaustion she had been holding back finally showing plainly on her face now that the door was closed, and it was only the two of them left in the room, Akeno and Asia having quietly excused themselves to give her space. You don't have to be strong every second of every day, Issei said. Not with us. Not with me. Rias was quiet for a long moment, studying him in the soft evening light filtering through the clubroom windows. You have changed a great deal since the day I first found you, she said finally. Do you know that? The boy I reincarnated 2 years ago would never have thought to comfort me. He would have been too busy panicking about whatever danger was directly in front of him. I've had a lot of practice panicking productively since then, Issei said, and was rewarded with a small, genuine smile. I am grateful, Rias said quietly, that whatever chose to bond with you that night beneath the cathedral, it chose someone capable of this. Of steadiness and kindness, even in the middle of everything falling apart around him. I do not think most people would have handled the last 2 weeks half as well as you have. I had a good teacher, Issei said, echoing his own words to Akeno days earlier without quite realizing it. You taught me most of what I know about handling pressure without falling apart. Rias's smile deepened, warm and unguarded in a way she rarely allowed herself to be, even in front of her own peerage. Then I suppose we taught each other something, she said, and reached over to rest her hand lightly over his, the same small, grounding gesture she had offered him days before. Whatever the choir turns out to be, whatever comes for you next, I promise you this. I will not let them take you from us. Not without a fight either of us will ever forget. Issei felt the golden light beneath his skin pulse once, warm and steady, as though even Aurelian had heard the promise and approved of it. I believe you, he said softly. I don't think I've ever believed anything more. They sat together in comfortable silence for a while after that, the weight of the evening's revelation settling into something more bearable now that it was shared rather than carried alone, and outside the clubroom window, the night stretched on quiet and watchful over Ko, unaware or perhaps entirely aware that somewhere far beyond its borders, An organization older than most of the current supernatural world's memory had already begun, slowly and carefully, to stir. The day after the meeting with Azazel, Rias insisted on a full peerage strategy session, gathering everyone in the clubroom to discuss not just Issei's power, but how the group as a whole might need to adapt if the choir's warning turned out to be more than idle theater. Kaneko and Kiba, who had spent most of the previous 2 weeks on the periphery of the crisis, found themselves drawn more directly into the center of it. I want your honest assessment, Rias said, addressing Kiba directly. If we are forced into open combat with an organization capable of moving undetected even past Sona's wards, what does our current formation lack? Kiba considered the question with the same careful precision he brought to every blade he swung. Speed, he said finally. Everyone in this room is strong, but strength alone will not matter if the enemy can strike and vanish before we can properly respond. We need someone capable of closing distance instantly, the moment a threat reveals itself, before it has the chance to retreat. That would be you, Kaneko said simply. It would need to be more than just me, Kiba said. One fast striker can be countered. 2, moving in coordination, are much harder to predict. Rias nodded slowly, already turning the strategic problem over in her mind. Kaneko, would you be willing to train alongside Kiba specifically toward that goal? Your senses are already the sharpest in the peerage. Paired with his speed, you could theoretically identify and intercept a threat faster than any of us. Kaneko considered this for a moment, her expression as unreadable as ever, before giving a small, firm nod. I can do that. Good, Rias said. Then that becomes your focus for the next several days, alongside everything else. I want this peerage functioning as a single coordinated unit by the time the choir decides to test us again, not a collection of individually strong fighters reacting separately to the same threat. The training that followed was intense, methodical, and for Issei, oddly reassuring to watch from the sidelines during his own breaks between sessions with Akeno and Asia. He had always known Kiba and Kaneko were capable, but watching them build a genuine partnership in real time, communicating in short, efficient bursts as they refined their coordinated strikes against increasingly difficult training constructs Rias conjured for them, gave him a clearer sense of just how seriously everyone had taken the threat. They are good together, Akeno observed one evening, watching alongside Issei as Kaneko intercepted a fast-moving construct and Kiba closed the distance a half-second later to finish it off cleanly. I do not think I have ever seen Kaneko-chan move quite that fluidly with anyone else. Rias really thought this through, Issei said, impressed despite the underlying tension that colored every training session now. A few weeks ago we were just a normal peerage doing normal devil work. Now we're basically building a small army specifically designed to fight something we barely understand. That is what family does, Akeno said simply. Adjusts. Adapts. Finds a way to protect its own, no matter how unfamiliar the threat turns out to be. She glanced sideways at him, something thoughtful in her violet eyes. You are part of that family too, you know. Not just the reason we are training so hard. An actual part of it. Issei felt something warm settle in his chest at that, a quiet certainty that had been growing steadily since the night the cathedral floor first cracked open beneath him. I know, he said softly. I think I finally actually believe that now. Later that same evening, after training had wound down and most of the peerage had scattered to rest before another long day of preparation, Issei found Asia sitting alone near the clubroom window, watching the last light fade from the sky with a quiet, contemplative expression. Everything okay? He asked, settling into the seat beside her. I was thinking about the illustration Bucho found, Asia admitted. The 7 figures, gathered around the golden light. I keep wondering if it means something is going to be asked of the rest of us too, eventually. Something beyond simply supporting you from the outside. Would that scare you? Issei asked gently. If it turned out to mean something like that? Asia considered the question seriously, the way she considered most things, with quiet, careful honesty. A little, she said. But mostly I think it would feel right. I have spent so much of my life being told that all I was good for was healing from a safe distance, staying out of the way while others did the difficult, dangerous work of actually protecting people. If Aurelian truly needs more than just you to carry it, I do not think I would be afraid of being asked to help carry that weight too. Issei looked at her, at the quiet strength beneath her gentle exterior, the same strength that had led her to heal a wounded devil despite knowing exactly what it would cost her, and felt a fresh wave of admiration settle alongside the warmth already gathering in his chest. I think you'd be incredible at it, he said honestly. Whatever it turns out to mean. Asia's smile was soft, luminous in the fading evening light. Thank you, Issei-san, she said. That means more to me than you probably know. Outside the window, the sky had finally darkened fully into night, stars scattered faintly across it despite the ambient light of the town below, and somewhere beyond the edges of Ko, unseen and unhurried, something ancient and patient continued its slow, deliberate approach, entirely unaware that the family it had come to test had already begun, quietly and steadily, to become exactly the kind of unified, unshakable force capable of standing against it. The days that followed the meeting with Azazel settled into a strange, watchful rhythm, half ordinary school life and half quiet preparation for a threat none of them could fully define yet. Rias spent every free hour buried in the oldest sections of the Gremory archive, and though she found scattered references to the choir, fragments too damaged or too heavily encrypted to translate fully, she uncovered nothing that told them whether the organization still existed, or where it might be if it did. It was Kaneko, of all people, who noticed the first real sign of trouble. Someone has been watching the school, she said quietly during a training session, her cat-like senses more attuned to subtle presences than anyone else in the peerage. Not Gregory. Not devils. Something quieter than that. I have caught the scent twice now, near the west gate, but it disappears before I can track it properly. Rias's expression sharpened immediately. How long has this been happening? 2 days, Kaneko admitted. I did not want to raise the alarm until I was certain it was not simply a stray familiar or a curious student. And now you are certain? Akeno asked. Kaneko nodded grim. Whatever it is, it does not smell like anything from the 3 factions. It does not smell like anything at all, actually. Which is exactly the kind of thing that should worry us. The chamber fell quiet at that. Issei felt the golden light beneath his skin stir uneasily, a faint prickling awareness that he had come to associate with genuine danger rather than simple nerves. The choir, Rias said quietly. If it is them, they would know how to move without leaving a trace any of the established factions could easily detect. That is precisely the kind of skill an organization built to hunt gods would need to master. So what do we do? Issei asked. Rias considered the question carefully, her mind already working through the possibilities with the same sharp, methodical focus she brought to every crisis. We tighten our perimeter, she said finally. No one goes anywhere alone, not even within the school grounds. I want Kaneko and Kiba rotating patrol shifts around the property, and I want Sona informed immediately so her own network can watch for similar signs across the wider district. And Issei? Asia asked, worry evident in her voice. Issei stays within sight of at least 2 of us at all times, Rias said. No exceptions, not even to use the bathroom alone, if it comes to that. Great, Issei muttered. Love that level of supervision. Would you prefer the alternative? Rias asked, arching an eyebrow. No, ma'am, Issei said quickly, and Akeno laughed despite the tension in the room, a small, genuine sound that eased some of the weight pressing down on all of them. That evening, as the sun set over Ko and the training chamber emptied out one person at a time, Issei found himself alone with Asia for the first time in days, the 2 of them lingering near the chamber's entrance while Rias finished a final call with Sona and Akeno went to check the perimeter with Kaneko. You have been quiet, Issei said gently. More than usual, I mean. Asia's hands twisted together in her lap, a familiar nervous habit. I keep thinking about what Governor General Azazel said, she admitted. About the choir. About organizations built specifically to destroy things like Aurelian. She looked up at him, pale eyes full of a worry she rarely let show so openly. I am afraid, Issei-san. Not for myself. For you. If they come for you the way they once came for gods far more powerful than any of us, I do not know what any of us could do to stop them. Issei sat down beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched, and let the silence stretch for a moment before he answered. I'm scared too, he admitted honestly. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't. But I keep thinking about something Rias said to me a few nights ago. That I don't have to be strong every second of every day. That I'm allowed to let people carry part of this with me. You are, Asia said immediately, fiercely, more forceful than he had ever heard her. You are never alone in this, Issei-san. Not while I am still standing beside you. Something in Issei's chest tightened, warm and grateful and a little overwhelmed by the quiet certainty in her voice. Thank you, he said softly. I mean that. More than I probably know how to say properly. Asia's cheeks colored, but she held his gaze, steady despite the blush. You do not need to say it perfectly, she said. You only need to mean it. And I already know that you do. They sat together quietly after that, watching the last light fade from the training chamber's high windows, and though the fear of what was coming hadn't left either of them entirely, it felt, for the first time in days, like something they were carrying together rather than something threatening to crush them individually. Somewhere beyond the school's protective wards, patient and unseen, something continued to watch, waiting for the right moment to make its presence known, but for now, in the quiet golden light of a evening, Issei allowed himself to simply exist beside someone who had chosen, without hesitation, to stay. The attack came 4 nights later, and it came exactly the way Rias had feared, quietly, without warning, from a direction none of their patrols had thought to watch closely enough. Issei had been walking back from the vending machines near the gymnasium with Kiba, a short, supposedly safe errand within the school's protective perimeter, when the air around them suddenly went cold in a way that had nothing to do with the evening chill. Kiba's sword was already in his hand before Issei had fully registered what was wrong, his expression tight with an alertness that told Issei this was not a false alarm. Something is here, Kiba said quietly. Close. I cannot pinpoint it. The golden light beneath Issei's skin flared in sudden, sharp warning, and he barely had time to shout a warning of his own before a figure dropped from the shadows above the gymnasium roof, landing between them with unnatural silence, cloaked head to foot in featureless gray fabric that gave away nothing of who or what stood beneath it. Red Dragon Emperor, the figure said, its voice strange and layered, either male nor female, either young nor old. You carry something that does not belong to this age. The choir has come to correct that oversight. The choir, Kiba repeated, already shifting into a defensive stance in front of Issei. You are the ones Azazel warned us about. Warnings will not save him, the figure said, and moved. It was fast, faster than anything Issei had faced before, faster even than the fallen angel scout at the cathedral. Kiba barely managed to intercept the first strike, his sword flashing silver as he redirected a blow that would have taken Issei's head off entirely. The figure recovered instantly, pivoting into a second attack aimed directly at Issei's chest, and this time Issei reacted on pure instinct, the golden shield rising fast and bright between himself and the strike. The impact staggered him backward several feet, his shield holding but the force behind it far greater than anything he braced for in training. The figure paused, studying him through whatever lay beneath that featureless hood. Interesting, it said. The old text described the vessel bond as fragile in its first weeks. Yours has already stabilized considerably. That will make this more complicated than anticipated. Glad I could inconvenience you, Issei said, forcing steadiness into his voice despite his racing heart. The figure didn't respond to the bravado. It simply attacked again, faster this time, and Kiba threw himself into the exchange with everything he had, buying Issei precious seconds to gather himself. But it was clear within moments that Kiba alone could not hold this thing off indefinitely. Its strikes precise, economical, utterly without wasted motion, the fighting style of something that had trained against beings far more dangerous than a single night-class devil. Then the courtyard lit up with crimson light as Rias arrived at a dead sprint, Akeno and Kaneko close behind her, alerted by whatever alarm had been tripped the moment the figure crossed onto school grounds. Get behind me, Rias snapped, already gathering a dense sphere of destruction magic in her palm as she placed herself bodily between Issei and their attacker. The figure regarded the new arrivals with what might have been mild interest beneath its hood. Gremory's peerage. How predictably devoted. It shifted its stance, unbothered by the sudden numerical disadvantage. I was not sent to fight all of you tonight. Merely to confirm what the fallen angel scout already reported, and to deliver a message. Then deliver it and leave, Rias said, magic crackling dangerously around her clenched fist. The choir does not forget its purpose, the figure said. We sealed the old gods once, at great cost, to protect a world too young and too fragile to survive their presence. That world has grown since then, but it has not grown wise. Whatever bond has formed between the boy and the fragment he carries will be severed, one way or another. We would prefer it happen with his cooperation. We are prepared, however, for it to happen without it. Over my dead body, Issei said, stepping up beside Rias despite her sharp look of warning. Something in the figure's posture shifted, almost like amusement. That option remains available as well, should it come to that. Consider this a courtesy, Red Dragon Emperor. The next visit will not be a conversation. Before anyone could respond, the figure simply dissolved into shadow and was gone, the cold pressure in the air vanishing with it as suddenly as it had arrived, leaving the courtyard silent except for the ragged sound of everyone's breathing and the distant hum of the school's protective wards struggling to register what had just slipped past them entirely unnoticed. Rias lowered her hand slowly, the destruction magic fading from her palm, and turned to look at Issei with an expression caught somewhere between fury and fear. Are you hurt? I'm okay, Issei said, though his voice shook slightly with the aftermath of adrenaline. Kiba got the worst of it protecting me. Kiba waved off the concern despite a shallow cut along his forearm, already healing thanks to a devil's natural resilience. I am fine. It was testing us more than actually trying to kill anyone tonight, I think. Testing, Rias repeated grimly. And now it knows exactly how strong your shield has become, and exactly how quickly the rest of us can respond to a threat inside our own perimeter. She looked around at the gathered peerage, at Akeno's tense readiness, Kaniko's flattened ears, Asia's wide, frightened eyes as she arrived a moment too late to help but just in time to see the aftermath. This changes everything. The choir is not a rumor from an old text anymore. It is real, and it is here. And it just told us plainly that it intends to take Issei from us whether he agrees to it or not. So what do we do? Akeno asked, her voice tight with barely restrained anger. Rias's crimson eyes hardened, certain and unshakable despite the fears still lingering beneath the surface. We stop reacting, she said. And we start preparing for a fight we can actually win, because the next time that thing comes back, I do not intend to let it walk away with nothing more than a warning delivered and a courtesy extended. Sona arrived within the hour, alerted by Rias through their emergency channel, her expression grave as she surveyed the courtyard where the confrontation had taken place, her own detection equipment already sweeping the area for any lingering trace of the choir's presence. Nothing, she reported after several minutes. Not even residual magic. Whatever that thing was, it left no signature my instruments can register at all, which is, frankly, more alarming than if it had left something obvious behind. It said it was only testing us tonight, Rias said, relaying the encounter in careful detail, while Asia tended to Kiba's healing arm nearby. Which means it will be back, better prepared, probably with more of whatever passes for the choir's active membership these days. I have never encountered anything like this in any of my research, Sona admitted, adjusting her glasses with a frown. The old texts mention the choir only in fragments, always in connection with the original severance, always described as an alliance rather than a single organized faction. If they truly still exist in any operational capacity after this many centuries, we have almost no reliable information about their numbers, their methods, or their actual limitations. Then we work with what we do know, Rias said. It moves without detection. It fights with precision rather than brute force. And it wants Issei's bond with Aurelian severed, one way or another. She turned to Issei, who had been quiet through most of the debrief, still processing the adrenaline crash from the encounter. I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly. Okay, Issei said. If severing the bond were truly the only way to keep everyone safe, Rias said carefully, would you consider it? The question hung heavy in the air. Issei felt the golden light beneath his skin pulse once, quiet and steady, patient as it had been from the very first night, waiting without pressure for whatever answer he chose to give. I don't know, he admitted honestly. A week ago, maybe. But now I don't know. It hasn't hurt anyone. It's helped me protect people I care about. And it feels like giving it up would mean abandoning something that already chose to trust me, back when it had nothing left except that choice. He looked around the room, at Rias, at Akeno, at Asia's worried, steady presence, at Kaneko and Kiba near the door. But if it ever came down to that bond or all of you, I wouldn't hesitate. I want to be clear about that. You guys come first. Always. Rias studied him for a long moment, something complicated and warm passing behind her eyes. I do not think it will come to that, she said finally. But thank you for the honesty. It matters. Akeno stepped forward, her expression thoughtful. May I say something? At Rias's nod, she continued. I do not think severing the bond is even the right question to be asking. The choir sealed these gods away centuries ago because the world was not ready to coexist with them. But the world has changed since then. We have factions capable of diplomacy now, capable of restraint, capable of choosing partnership over domination. Azazel proved that himself, sitting across from us and choosing curiosity over conquest. She looked at Issei. Maybe the real question is not whether the bond should be severed, but whether the choir is even right that it needs to be, after all this time. Sona considered that carefully. An interesting point. If the choir's entire justification rests on an assumption that has not been reevaluated in centuries, it may be possible to challenge that assumption directly, rather than simply defending against them indefinitely. That would require actually talking to them, Rias pointed out. Which has proven difficult, given that the one representative we have met so far seemed far more interested in delivering threats than having a conversation. Then we make ourselves difficult to ignore, Akeno said, a familiar sharp confidence returning to her voice. We do not wait quietly for them to decide we are worth talking to instead of fighting. We show them exactly how costly fighting us would actually be, until talking becomes the more attractive option. Rias's mouth curved into a small, determined smile, the first genuine one Issei had seen from her since the attack. I like that plan considerably more than sitting behind our wards waiting for the next visit. She turned to the room at large. Starting tomorrow, we train harder than we ever have before. Every member of this peerage, every ability, refined and pushed to its absolute limit. If the choir wants a fight before they will consider a conversation, we will make certain it is the hardest fight they have faced in centuries. A quiet, determined energy settled over the room at that, the fear of the night's encounter transforming, slowly, into something closer to resolve. Issei looked around at all of them, gathered together despite the danger circling ever closer, and felt the golden light beneath his skin settle into something warm and steady, as though even Aurelian approved of the plan taking shape around him. They will come again, the ancient voice murmured quietly in the back of his mind, thoughtful rather than afraid. But you are not facing them the way I once did, alone and unprepared for betrayal. Whatever else changes, that much is already different, and it matters more than you may yet understand. Issei allowed himself, for the first time since the attack, a small, tired smile. Yeah, he murmured back. It really does. Training over the following week became something closer to a siege preparation than ordinary practice. Rias drilled every member of her peerage relentlessly, running combat scenarios designed specifically to counter an opponent who fought with speed, precision, and near total stealth. Kiba worked on faster draw techniques. Kaneko practiced tracking exercises meant to catch the faintest trace of an approaching threat before it could close the distance, and Akeno pushed her lightning control to new levels of precision, learning to strike faster and more accurately than ever before. Issei trained hardest of all, spending every free hour he had testing the limits of the golden shield, learning to summon it faster, to hold it longer, to shape it in ways he hadn't thought possible even a week earlier. Under Rias's careful guidance and Aurelian's patient instruction, he began to understand that the power wasn't only defensive, that the same principle allowing him to unmake an incoming attack could, with enough control, extend outward, protecting not just himself but the people standing beside him. Try it on me, Akeno said one evening, standing several feet away with her usual confident smile, though something more serious lingered behind her eyes. A shield large enough to cover us both. If you can manage that reliably, it changes everything about how we can fight together. Issei concentrated, reaching for the golden light and pushing it outward rather than simply holding it close, and after several failed attempts that left him breathless and frustrated, the shield finally expanded, thin and shimmering, wide enough to encompass them both. There, Akeno said softly, genuine pride warming her voice. See? I told you that you could do it. Barely, Issei said, sweat beading on his forehead from the effort. Felt like trying to stretch a blanket that's too small for the bed. You will get stronger, Akeno said with certainty. You always do. She studied him for a moment, something thoughtful crossing her expression. Can I ask you something, while we are alone? Sure. Are you happy? She asked. Truly, I mean. Despite everything, the danger, the choir, the weight of carrying something ancient and mysterious inside you. Are you happy here with us? Issei considered the question seriously, letting the golden shield fade as he thought it through. Yeah, he said finally, surprising himself with how certain the answer felt. I mean, I'm terrified half the time, and I'm pretty sure I've aged about 10 years in the last 2 weeks alone. But yeah, I'm happy. Happier than I probably have any right to be, considering everything. Akeno's smile turned soft, genuine, entirely without her usual teasing edge. Good, she said. That is all I wanted to know. Elsewhere in the training chamber, Asia worked quietly with Rias on refining the way her healing magic interacted with Issei's new power, trying to find ways to accelerate his recovery between training sessions without disrupting the delicate balance Aurelian maintained within him. It responds to intention, Asia observed thoughtfully, her hands glowing softly as she studied the golden light beneath Issei's skin during a brief rest between exercises. The more I focus on wanting to help rather than simply wanting to heal, the more readily it seems to work with me instead of around me. That tracks with everything else we have learned about it, Rias said, watching closely. It responds to genuine connection more than raw magical force. Which makes sense, in a strange way, for something that chose Issei specifically because of who he was rather than what he could do. Asia glanced up at Issei with a small, warm smile. I think that is a good thing, she said. It means the people who care about you the most are also the ones best equipped to help you carry this. Lucky me, Issei said, managing a tired grin despite his exhaustion. Best support system a guy carrying an ancient forgotten god could ask for. By the end of the week, Rias gathered the full peerage together one final time before what she suspected would be the choir's next, more serious approach. The training chamber felt different somehow, charged with a quiet, determined energy that hadn't been there 2 weeks earlier, when fear had still outweighed resolve. I do not know exactly when they will return, Rias said, addressing everyone gathered before her. But I know we are ready for them in a way we were not before. Whatever the choir believes about the world, about primordial power, about what needs to be sealed away for everyone's safety, they are about to learn that this particular god chose a vessel surrounded by people who refused to let him face that belief alone. She looked at Issei last, crimson eyes steady and certain. Whatever happens next, we face it together. All of us. Together, Akeno echoed, stepping up beside him. Together, Asia said softly, taking his hand without hesitation. Kaneko gave a small, firm nod from across the room, and Kiba offered a steady, determined smile that needed no words at all. Issei looked around at all of them, felt the golden light beneath his skin settle into something calm and resolute, and understood, with a clarity that surprised him, that whatever the choir intended to test next, whatever ancient authority they believed they still carried over gods and vessels alike, they were about to discover that the world Aurelian had woken up into was not the one it had been sealed away from centuries ago. It was a world that had, against every expectation, learned to stand together after all. Beyond the school's wards, unseen and patient, something ancient and grim continued its slow approach toward Ko, carrying with it the full weight of a purpose centuries in the making, unaware or perhaps entirely unconcerned that the boy it had come to claim was no longer facing this fight alone, and had not been, not for a very long time. The second visit from the choir did not come quietly. It arrived on a Sunday afternoon, in broad daylight, which Rias later said frightened her more than any nighttime ambush could have. A column of pale gray light split the sky directly above the old school building, visible to every ordinary student still lingering on campus for weekend clubs, and from it descended not one cloaked figure, but 5, along with something else, something that made the golden light beneath Issei's skin recoil the moment it touched the ground. Everyone inside now, Rias snapped, already moving toward the courtyard with her full peerage falling into formation behind her. Sona arrived within seconds, alerted by wards that had, this time, actually managed to register the intrusion, her own counsel trailing close behind her. At the center of the 5 cloaked figures stood a 6th, taller, unhood, an old man with silver hair and eyes the pale, colorless gray of a winter sky. He carried no visible weapon, and yet the air around him felt heavier than anything Issei had encountered since the night the cathedral floor first cracked open. Rias Gremory, the old man said, his voice carrying easily across the courtyard despite its quiet, measured tone. I am called Vesalius, and I speak for the choir. I did not come today to fight, though I understand my associate's earlier visit left that impression. You attacked one of my peerage, Rias said coldly, stepping forward with Issei close behind her. A test, Vesalius said unbothered. Necessary if regrettable. I needed to know how far the bond had progressed before I decided how to proceed. His pale eyes shifted to Issei, studying him with the same detached, scholarly interest Azazel had shown weeks earlier, though far colder. Further than I expected, if I am honest. The light before names has not attached itself this firmly to a vessel and longer than your entire species has existed in its current form. The name struck something in Issei's chest, the same ache he had felt in the archive room reading Rias's old scroll. You know what it's called, he said. Actually called. Not just Aurelian. Aurelian was a name it took for itself, long after we sealed it, Vesalius said. A name meant to sound smaller, gentler, less like the thing that terrified an entire generation of gods and mortals alike into forging an alliance against it. He tilted his head slightly. Has it told you what it actually is, boy? Not what it wishes to be. What it was. It said it fought in the severance, Issei said carefully. That it helped end the war before it got sealed away by the people it saved. A partial truth, Vesalius said. The light before names did fight in the severance, and it did help end it. But it did not simply help. It ended the war nearly single-handedly, unmaking 3 younger gods so completely that no trace of them remains in any record from that era, not even their names. We did not seal it away out of ingratitude, Red Dragon Emperor. We sealed it away because something capable of erasing gods from history without visible effort should never be allowed to exist unchecked, no matter how noble its intentions in that particular moment happened to be. The courtyard fell silent. Issei felt the golden light beneath his skin pulse, slow and heavy, and for the first time since the bond had formed, he felt something that might have been shame radiating alongside it, ancient and deeply buried. Is that true? Issei asked quietly, reaching inward. Is that really what happened? The answer came slowly, reluctant in a way Issei had never heard from the voice before. It is true, Aurelian admitted. I did what needed to be done to end the war. I did not count the cost of what I became in doing it, until it was far too late to take it back. Rias's expression had not softened, but something in her posture shifted, weighing this new information carefully. And what do you intend to do with that history now, Vesalius? Punish a boy for the actions of something that made its choices centuries before he was ever born? I have no interest in punishing anyone, Vesalius said. I am simply here to offer a choice, the same choice the choir has offered every vessel foolish or unlucky enough to bond with a sealed primordial since our order was founded. Release the bond willingly, and we will reseal the light before names somewhere far from this world, somewhere it can no longer threaten the fragile peace your factions have built. Refuse, and we will be forced to take a more direct approach, one considerably less gentle than this conversation. And if I say no? Issei asked, standing his ground despite the weight pressing down on him from every direction. Vesalius studied him for a long, silent moment, something almost like respect flickering behind those colorless eyes. Then you will have made your choice, he said. And so, unfortunately, will I. Give us time, Rias said before Issei could answer. This is not a decision to be made in the middle of a courtyard confrontation. If the choir truly values wisdom over hasty judgment, as your own founding purpose suggests, you will grant us the chance to consider this properly. Vesalius considered the request, his expression unreadable. 3 days, he said finally. The same courtesy Gregory was extended, I understand, though I suspect our patience will prove considerably shorter than the Governor-General's, should this end in refusal. He turned, his 4 cloaked companions falling into step behind him without a word. Use the time wisely, Red Dragon Emperor. I would prefer this end without further violence, though I have learned, across many centuries, not to expect that particular mercy from the world. The column of pale light returned, and within moments the choir's delegation was gone, leaving only a heavy, uneasy silence hanging over the courtyard, and an entire school full of students who had just witnessed something they would spend the rest of the day trying to explain away as an elaborate special effect or a shared hallucination. Back in the clubroom, the mood was grim. Rias paced in front of her desk, the same restless energy from weeks earlier returned tenfold, while Akeno stood near the window with her arms crossed tightly, her usual composure cracked by something close to genuine fear. 3 days, Rias said again, mostly to herself. That is not enough time to properly research an organization we barely understood existed a month ago. It's enough time to make a choice, Issei said quietly, and the room turned to look at him. I already know what I'm choosing, Rias. I'm not giving up the bond. Issei, Asia said softly, worry creasing her gentle features. You heard what Vesalius said? What Aurelian admitted. It erased entire gods from existence during the severance. That is not a small thing to carry, or to trust. I know, Issei said. And it scared me too, hearing that. But I asked it directly, right there in the courtyard, and it didn't lie to me. It didn't try to make itself sound better than it was. It just told me the truth, even though the truth was ugly, because I think it's tired of hiding from what it did. He looked around at all of them, at Rias's tense worry, Akeno's fear, Asia's uncertainty, Kaneko and Kiba's watchful silence. That has to count for something. A weapon that erases gods from history doesn't stop to feel guilty about it centuries later. Only something that actually regrets what it became would carry that kind of shame. Silence stretched through the room as everyone absorbed that. Finally, Rias stopped pacing and looked at him directly, something complicated passing behind her crimson eyes. You truly believe that, she said. Not just hope it. Believe it. Yeah, Issei said. I do. Rias was quiet for a long moment, weighing his certainty against the very real danger Vesalius had promised should they refuse. Finally, she let out a slow breath and nodded. Then we do not have 3 days to research an unfamiliar organization, she said. We have 3 days to prepare for a fight we already know is coming, because I do not believe for one moment that the choir will accept a refusal gracefully, however politely Vesalius phrased his offer. So we fight, Akeno said, something steadying in her voice now that the decision had been made plainly. We fight, Rias confirmed. But we do not fight blind this time. I want everything we can learn about Vesalius specifically, about his 4 companions, about any weakness the choir might have that 1,000 years of maintaining seals might have left them vulnerable to. She turned to Sona, who had remained quietly present through the entire exchange, already turning the tactical problem over in her sharp mind. Will your council help with that research? Of course, Sona said immediately. And I intend to contact Azazel as well. If the choir is preparing to act against Cook territory directly, he deserves to know, and given his stated interest in Issei's situation, he may be willing to offer more direct assistance than simple diplomatic goodwill this time. Do it, Rias said. Use every resource available to us. We have 3 days, and I do not intend to waste a single hour of them. The meeting broke apart into a flurry of purposeful activity, everyone moving quickly toward their assigned tasks, and Issei found himself standing alone for a moment near the clubroom window, watching the golden light beneath his skin pulse slow and steady, patient as it had always been. You okay in there? He murmured quietly. I am afraid, Aurelian admitted, its voice quieter than Issei had ever heard it. Not for myself. I have already lost everything I once was, and I made my peace with that centuries ago. I am afraid for you, and for the people who have chosen, so foolishly and so bravely, to stand beside something with my history. Asterisk. They're not being foolish, Issei said softly. They're choosing this because it's the right thing to do. Same reason you chose me, right? Not because it was easy. Because it mattered. There was a long pause before the ancient voice answered, something that might have been warmth finally breaking through the fear. Yes, it said. That is exactly why. Azazel arrived within hours of Sona's message, appearing in the clubroom without the formal ceremony of their first meeting, his expression far more serious than the easy, curious amusement he had shown weeks earlier. The choir, he said, settling into a chair across from Rias without waiting for an invitation. I did not think they were still active in any organized capacity. This complicates things considerably. You know about them, Rias said. More than you told us before. I know fragments, Azazel admitted. Enough to be genuinely concerned. The choir was never a large organization, even at the height of its power during the severance. What it lacked in numbers, it made up for an absolute conviction and centuries of accumulated knowledge about how to bind and unbind beings far more powerful than any single faction could handle alone. He glanced at Issei. If Vesalius himself came to deliver the ultimatum, that tells me the choir is taking this situation extremely seriously. He does not typically involve himself in matters he considers minor. You know him, Issei said, surprised. By reputation, Azazel said. He has walked this earth since before recorded history, as far as anyone can determine. If the stories are even half accurate, he was present for the original severance, and for every sealing that followed it. He does not make threats he cannot back up, and he does not offer choices he does not genuinely believe are choices, however narrow the acceptable answers might be. Rias's jaw tightened. So when he says he would prefer this end without violence, he means it. He means it, Azazel confirmed. But make no mistake, if you refuse his offer, he will follow through on the alternative just as sincerely. Men like Vesalius do not bluff. They simply believe, with absolute conviction, that they are doing the necessary, difficult work that keeps the world safe from itself. And what do you believe? Issei asked quietly. Azazel considered the question seriously, golden eyes thoughtful. I believe the world he sealed those gods away from no longer exists, he said finally. I believe factions have learned, slowly and imperfectly, to coexist rather than simply conquer. And I believe an organization that has spent 1,000 years operating on a single unchanging assumption may have lost the ability to recognize when that assumption stops being true. He looked at Issei directly. But I also believe Vesalius is not wrong to be cautious. Whatever the light before names once was, whatever it did during the severance, that history is real, and pretending otherwise would be its own kind of foolishness. So what do we do? Rias asked. You prepare for a fight, Azazel said simply. And I will help, within limits. Gregory cannot officially intervene in a conflict between the choir and a devil peerage without risking the broader peace between factions. But I can offer information, and I can make certain no other faction attempts to exploit the chaos while you are otherwise occupied. That is the most I can promise without creating a diplomatic incident considerably worse than the one you are already facing. That's more than we had an hour ago, Issei said. Thank you. Azazel's mouth curved into something almost like a smile, though the weight of the situation kept it from reaching his eyes entirely. Do not thank me yet, boy. Thank me if you survive the next 3 days with that bond intact, and your peerage still standing. Until then, save your gratitude for whoever actually earns it in the fight to come. He rose to leave, pausing at the doorway to look back at the room one final time. For what it is worth, he said, I hope you are right about what that power actually is now, and not simply what it once was. The world could use a little more proof that old mistakes do not have to define everything that comes after them. The door closed behind him, and the clubroom settled into a heavy, purposeful quiet, everyone processing the weight of what was coming. Rias turned to address the room, her voice steady despite the tension visible in every line of her posture. 3 days, she said. We use every hour of them. Kiba, Kaneko, continue refining your coordination. Akeno, I want your lightning control pushed to its absolute limit. We may need precision strikes capable of disabling rather than simply damaging, if Vesalius's companions prove as skilled as I suspect they are. Asia, I need you focused on sustaining healing output over an extended engagement. This will not be a short fight if it comes to one. And me? Issei asked. Rias turned to him, something fierce and determined settling behind her crimson eyes. You, she said, are going to learn exactly how far that shield can extend, and exactly what else Aurelian is capable of beyond simple defense. Because if the choir intends to test the full weight of what you carry, I want you ready to show them precisely why it chose you, and why that choice was not a mistake. Issei felt the golden light beneath his skin flare warm and steady in response, as though even Aurelian had heard the challenge and welcomed it. Yes, Butcho, he said, and for the first time since Vesalius's ultimatum, felt something closer to readiness than fear settle into his chest. The next 2 days passed in a blur of relentless preparation, but it was the quiet moments between training sessions that stayed with Issei most clearly afterward, small fragments of connection that felt more important, somehow, than any tactical advantage they were building toward. He found Akeno alone on the school roof the evening before the deadline, sitting with her knees drawn up, watching the sunset paint the sky in deep orange and violet, colors that reminded him uncomfortably of the light that had first poured out of the cathedral 4 weeks earlier. Room for one more? He asked. Akeno glanced up, and something in her expression eased at the sight of him, the sharp, focused readiness she had carried through most of the day softening into something more vulnerable. Always, she said, and shifted slightly to make space beside her. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the colors shift and deepen over the rooftops of Kuo. Finally Akeno spoke, her voice quieter than usual. I keep thinking about what Vesalius said, she admitted. About the light before names erasing gods from history without visible effort. I have spent my whole life being told that power like that, power without restraint, always ends in tragedy for everyone caught near it. She glanced at Issei sideways. And yet, sitting here now, all I feel is that I would rather face Vesalius and his entire choir than let them take that power away from you. I do not know what that says about me. It says you trust me, Issei said softly. More than you trust an old man's warning about something that happened centuries before either of us existed. Yes, Akeno said simply. I suppose it does. She was quiet for a moment longer, then reached over and took his hand, her fingers lacing through his with a gentleness that felt entirely different from her usual playful confidence. I do not say this lightly, Issei. You have become someone I care about more deeply than I expected to care about anyone, given everything I came from, everything I once believed I was too broken to deserve. Whatever happens tomorrow, I want you to know that. Issei felt his chest tighten with something warm and overwhelming, and he squeezed her hand gently in return. I care about you too, Akeno. A lot more than I probably know how to say properly. Akeno's smile was soft, genuine, entirely without her usual teasing edge, and for a moment they simply sat together in the fading light, two people bracing for a fight neither of them could fully predict the outcome of, finding whatever steadiness they could in each other's quiet company. Later that same evening, Issei found Asia in the training chamber alone, practicing the healing techniques Rias had assigned her, her small hands glowing with a soft, steady light even though there was no one left to heal. You should rest, Issei said gently, settling onto the floor beside her. I know, Asia admitted, letting the glow fade from her hands. I am simply afraid I will not be enough tomorrow, if the fight is as difficult as everyone expects it to be. You're always enough, Issei said, meaning it completely. You saved my life the very first week I knew you, remember? Before any of us knew what you were truly capable of. You have never once let any of us down when it mattered. Asia's cheeks colored slightly, but she held his gaze, the same quiet, unwavering certainty she always carried when something mattered enough to push through her own doubt. I do not want to lose you, she said softly. Not to the choir, not to anything. I know that is a selfish thing to admit, when there are so many larger things at stake, the balance between factions, the fate of an ancient god. But mostly, when I think about tomorrow, all I can think about is not wanting to lose you. You won't, Issei said, though he knew he couldn't fully promise that. I'm not going anywhere, Asia. Not without a fight neither the choir nor anyone else is going to forget. Asia reached out and took his hand, mirroring the same quiet gesture Akeno had offered him hours earlier, her fingers small and warm against his. promise me, she said, that whatever happens, you will not sacrifice yourself needlessly. That you will let us help carry this, the way you keep telling everyone else to let you help carry things for them. Issei considered the request seriously, understanding the weight of what she was actually asking. I promise, he said finally. I'll fight smart. I'll let you all help. I won't try to be a hero and get myself killed proving some point. Good, Asia said, a small, relieved smile breaking through her worry. Because I do not think I could bear it, if you did. They sat together quietly after that, the training chamber settling into a peaceful stillness around them, and though the fear of tomorrow's confrontation hadn't fully left either of them, it felt, in that quiet shared moment, like something bearable, something they were facing together rather than something threatening to break them apart before the choir even arrived. Rias found him last, well after midnight, when the rest of the peerage had finally gone to rest ahead of the confrontation waiting for them the following evening. Issei was still in the training chamber, sitting quietly on the floor with his back against the wall, watching the golden light beneath his skin pulse slow and steady in the dim, emergency lighting. You should be asleep, Rias said, settling onto the floor beside him without waiting for an invitation. Couldn't, Issei admitted. Too much in my head. Rias was quiet for a moment, studying him in the low light. I have been thinking about what you said earlier, she said. About believing Aurelian, despite everything Vesalius told us about what it did during the severance. You still worried I'm wrong about it? No, Rias said, surprising him with the certainty in her voice. I believed you the moment you said it, actually. I think I have believed it for longer than that, if I am honest with myself. But I have spent so much of my life being taught to weigh every decision carefully, to never trust conviction alone without evidence to support it, that admitting I already believed something before I could fully justify it felt, strangely, like its own kind of risk. Issei looked at her, at the exhaustion and determination warring behind her crimson eyes, and felt something in his chest settle into a quiet certainty of his own. You don't have to justify everything you know, he said. Sometimes you're allowed to just trust what you already know is true. Rias's mouth curved into a small, tired smile. You have taught me that, I think, more than anyone else ever has. How to trust instinct alongside strategy, instead of always defaulting to careful calculation over feeling. She reached over and took his hand, the same gesture Akeno and Asia had each offered him earlier that evening, though from Rias it carried a weight all its own, steady and unwavering. Whatever happens tomorrow, Issei, I want you to know that bringing you into my peerage remains the best decision I have ever made. Not because of the power you carry now, not because of Aurelian, or the boosted gear or anything else the world seems determined to measure you by. Because of who you actually are underneath all of it. Issei felt his throat tighten, overwhelmed by the quiet sincerity in her voice. Rias sighed. Let me finish, she said gently, echoing words he had heard from both Akeno and Asia over the past 2 weeks, and something about the pattern of it made his chest ache with a warmth he hadn't fully let himself feel until this exact moment. I do not know what tomorrow holds. I do not know if Vesalius will honor his own stated preference for a resolution without violence, or if this ends the way he warned it might, with force on both sides. But I know that whatever happens, I would rather face it standing beside you than anywhere else, doing anything else, with anyone else. Same, Issei said softly, his voice rough with emotion he didn't try to hide. I don't think I could face any of this without you. Any of you. They sat together in the quiet training chamber for a long while after that, hands still linked, the golden light beneath Issei's skin pulsing slow and steady in rhythm with something that felt, for the first time in weeks, less like fear and more like quiet, unshakable resolve. You are not facing tomorrow the way I once faced everything, Aurelian murmured softly in the back of his mind, its ancient voice warm with something that might have been hope. Alone, unseen, unchosen except by circumstance. Whatever Vesalius brings tomorrow, know that I go into it grateful, regardless of how it ends, simply for the chance to have known this, even briefly. Issei felt tears prick unexpectedly at the corner of his eyes, and he blinked them back, holding on to Rias's hand a little tighter. It's not ending tomorrow, he murmured, half to Rias, half to the ancient presence settled quietly beneath his skin. Not like that. I refuse to let it. Rias squeezed his hand in silent agreement, and outside the training chamber's high windows, the last hours of the night stretched on toward dawn, carrying with them the promise of a fight none of them could fully predict, but one they had, at last, prepared to face together, with nothing held back and nothing left unsaid. Vesalius returned precisely at sunset on the third day, exactly as promised, the same column of pale gray light splitting the sky above Ko Academy while Rias's full peerage waited in the courtyard below, arranged in the formation they had spent 3 days refining. This time, Sona's own council stood alongside them, a united front that Issei suspected surprised even Vesalius, given the careful neutrality most factions typically maintain toward internal devil affairs. You have made your choice, then, Vesalius said, stepping down from the fading light with his 4 cloaked companions arrayed behind him. His pale eyes swept over the assembled group, cataloguing each face with the same detached, scholarly interest he had shown before. We have, Rias said, standing at the front of the formation beside Issei. The bond stays. Issei keeps his own choice about what he carries, and Aurelian keeps its second chance. Vesalius studied them both for a long moment, and something in his expression, buried deep beneath centuries of careful discipline, flickered with what might have been genuine disappointment. I had hoped for a different answer, he said. Truly. I take no pleasure in what comes next. Then don't do it, Issei said. You said yourself you'd prefer this end without violence. So don't force it to be violent. Talk to us instead. Actually listen, the way Azazel did. I have listened, Vesalius said. I heard everything you and your Gremory believed you were telling me. But belief is not the same as certainty, Red Dragon Emperor, and the choir was not built on belief. It was built on the hard, unglamorous work of ensuring that mistakes made 1,000 years ago are never repeated, regardless of how sympathetic the circumstances surrounding them might appear. And if you're the one making the mistake this time? Rias asked. Have you considered that possibility even once, in all your centuries of certainty? Something in Vesalius's expression tightened, the first genuine crack Issei had seen in his composure since their first meeting. Every day, he admitted quietly. That is the burden of this work, Gremory. Never being entirely certain, and acting decisively regardless, because the alternative, hesitation, while an unbound God reshapes the world according to its own judgment, has proven catastrophic before, and I am not willing to gamble everything on the hope that this time will be different. It's already different, Issei said. Not because of what Aurelian promises. Because of what it's actually done. It's protected people. It hasn't hurt anyone who wasn't actively trying to hurt someone I care about. That's not nothing, Vesalius. That's proof, playing out right in front of you, and you're choosing not to see it because it's easier to trust an old rule than a new truth. The courtyard fell silent, the weight of the standoff pressing down on everyone gathered there. Vesalius regarded Issei for a long moment, something shifting behind those colorless eyes, old and tired and burdened with a weight Issei could only begin to imagine. Perhaps you are right, Vesalius said finally, quietly, almost to himself. Perhaps I have grown too comfortable with old certainties to properly recognize when the world has changed beneath them. He straightened, and when he spoke again, his voice had regained its formal, measured authority. But I cannot simply take your word for it, boy, however sincerely meant. The choir's purpose exists precisely because good intentions alone have never been sufficient protection against catastrophe. Then test us, Rias said. Properly. Not an ambush disguised as a demonstration. A real test, with real terms, that actually proves something either way. Vesalius considered this, and for the first time since his arrival, something like genuine curiosity replaced the grim resolve in his expression. What did you have in mind, Gremory? Rias glanced at Issei, a silent question passing between them, and Issei gave a small, steady nod. A duel, Rias said, turning back to Vesalius. You, or whichever of your companions you deem most capable, against Issei directly. Full effort, full restraint on lethal force from both sides. If Aurelian's power proves as dangerous and uncontrolled as you fear, you will see it clearly. And if it proves otherwise, if it proves capable of restraint even under genuine pressure, perhaps that will be the evidence your centuries of certainty actually require. Vesalius was quiet for a long moment, weighing the proposal carefully. Finally, he inclined his head, a small, formal gesture of acceptance. A reasonable test, he said. I will face the boy myself. It seems only fitting, given how personally I have involved myself in this decision. He gestured to his 4 companions, who withdrew several paces to the courtyard's edge, giving the center space room to breathe. Full effort, Red Dragon Emperor. Show me exactly what the light before names has become, in the hands of someone who claims to have earned its trust. Issei felt the golden light beneath his skin flare bright and steady, ready, and stepped forward into the open center of the courtyard to meet whatever came next. Vesalius moved first, and even holding back, even restrained by the terms of the duel, his speed was staggering, closing the distance between them in a fraction of a second, a lance of pale gray light forming in his outstretched hand as he struck. Issei's shield rose on pure instinct, golden light catching the blow and holding, though the force behind it drove him back several feet across the courtyard stones. Around them, the assembled peerage and council watched in tense silence, Rias's hands clenched tightly at her sides, resisting every instinct that told her to intervene. Good reflexes, Vesalius said, already pressing forward with a second strike, faster than the first. But reflexes alone will not answer the question I actually need answered. Issei caught the second blow as well, though it cost him more than the first, a faint tremor running through his shield as it absorbed the impact. He gritted his teeth and pushed back, not with an attack, but with the same expanding technique he had practiced with Akeno, the golden light spreading wide enough to create breathing room, forcing Vesalius to pull back rather than press the advantage directly into an unpredictable field. Interesting, Vesalius murmured, studying the widened shield with genuine scholarly interest even in the middle of combat. Defensive versatility. That was not part of the original power's documented capabilities, back when the severance ended. People change, Issei said, breathing hard already but holding steady. Guess power can too, if you actually let it. Vesalius attacked again, faster and harder, testing the limits of the expanded shield with a flurry of quick strikes designed to find any gap in Issei's control. Issei held on, drawing on everything he had trained for over the past 3 days, feeling Aurelian's presence settle deeper into the effort alongside him, not fighting for him, but fighting with him, patient and steady even as the strain began to show clearly on Issei's face. You are tiring, Vesalius observed, pulling back to give Issei a brief moment to recover. The bond still has limits. That, too, is useful information. I've got plenty left, Issei said, though his legs were beginning to shake with the effort of sustaining the shield through repeated impact. You do not need to prove endurance, Aurelian murmured quietly in his mind. You need to prove restraint. He is testing whether I would strike back with lethal force if pressed hard enough. Show him the answer, not through defense alone, but through choosing not to escalate, even when escalation would be easier. Issei understood immediately, and when Vesalius came at him again, faster still, clearly probing for the exact moment desperation might override restraint, Issei did not simply hold the shield. He let it soften at the last possible instant, absorbing the blow's force rather than deflecting it outright, a technique that cost him considerably more strain but left Vesalius's strike utterly harmless, unmade gently rather than violently rebuffed. Vesalius froze, genuine surprise flickering across his ancient features for the first time since the duel began. You chose the harder path, he said slowly. Deliberately. Even under pressure. Yeah, Issei said, breathing hard, sweat streaking down his face. Because that's the whole point, right? You're not actually testing whether I can win a fight. You're testing whether this thing inside me still knows how to hold back when holding back is the harder, better choice. And it does. It's been choosing that every single day since the night it saved my life instead of just taking what it wanted from me. The courtyard fell silent except for Issei's ragged breathing. Vesalius lowered the lance of pale light still gathered in his hand, studying Issei with an expression that had shifted, slowly and completely, from clinical assessment into something far more complicated. 3 days ago, Vesalius said quietly, I came here fully prepared to seal that power away by force, if necessary, certain that centuries of precedent left me no other responsible choice. He glanced around the courtyard, at Rias's fierce, protective stance, at Akeno's readiness, at Asia's quiet, steady healing light already gathering in case it was needed, Kaneko and Kiba poised and coordinated exactly as they had trained. I did not expect to find this. An entire peerage, willing to stand and fight for a choice that offered them nothing except danger and uncertainty in return. That's what family does, Issei said, echoing Akeno's words from days earlier without quite realizing it. Doesn't matter if it's easy. Matters if it's right. Vesalius was quiet for a long moment, the lance of light finally dissolving entirely from his hand, and when he spoke again, his voice carried a weight that hadn't been there before, something closer to genuine, ancient weariness finally allowed to surface. Perhaps, he said slowly, it is time the choir considered whether the world it swore to protect 1,000 years ago has finally become something worth trusting again. The tension in the courtyard did not vanish all at once, but it eased, slowly, palpably, as Vesalius stepped back and gestured for his 4 companions to lower their own readiness. Rias moved immediately to Issei's side, steadying him as his knees finally buckled under the accumulated strain of the duel, Asia close behind her with healing light already spilling warm and gentle from her hands. You held nothing back, Rias murmured, relief and pride mingling openly in her voice as she helped lower him carefully to sit against the courtyard stones. That was reckless and extraordinary in equal measure. Learn from the best, Issei managed, breathless but grinning despite the exhaustion weighing down every limb. Vesalius approached slowly, and though the 4 cloaked figures behind him remained watchful, none moved to intervene as their leader crossed the distance to stand before the group. Up close, his ancient features looked less severe than they had at the duel's start, something almost gentle settling into the deep lines of his face. I owe you an accounting, he said, addressing Rias directly, though his pale eyes kept drifting back to Issei with quiet, searching curiosity. The choir was founded on a single, unbending principle. That primordial power, once loosed upon a world unprepared for it, will inevitably corrupt whatever vessel attempts to hold it, regardless of intention. I have watched that principle prove true more times across the centuries than I care to remember. He paused, something heavy passing behind his colorless eyes. I have also, I now realize, stopped watching closely enough for the exceptions. Aurelian isn't an exception because it's special, Issei said, still catching his breath. It's an exception because it actually wants to be. That's the part your old texts probably never accounted for. A god that got tired of being feared, and decided to try something different instead. Vesalius studied him for a long moment, and then, slowly, deliberately, inclined his head in something that looked remarkably like respect. You have made your case more thoroughly than any vessel before you, Red Dragon Emperor. I will not pretend the choir's concerns vanish entirely because of one duel, however illuminating. Centuries of precedent do not dissolve overnight, no matter how compelling the evidence in front of me happens to be. But? Rias prompted, sensing the shift in his tone. But Vesalius continued, I am willing to extend something the choir has rarely offered in its long history. Observation, rather than immediate intervention. I will not seal the bond by force today, nor will I send my companions to test you again without warning, as we did before. His gaze settled on Issei fully now, steady and serious. In exchange I will be watching, from a distance, for as long as I deem necessary. If the bond you carry ever begins to show the corruption I have spent centuries guarding against, I will act, swiftly and without further warning. I hope, sincerely, that I never find cause to. That's fair, Issei said. More than fair, honestly. It is the best I am able to offer, Vesalius said, given everything I have believed for longer than any of you have been alive. He turned to address the wider courtyard, his voice carrying the same measured authority it had held from the moment of his arrival. Let it be known that the choir has observed the bond between the Red Dragon Emperor and the being once called the Light Before Names, and has found, for now, no cause for intervention. This assessment remains subject to review, should circumstances change. With that, the 4 cloaked figures gathered close around him once more, and a column of pale gray light descended from the darkening sky to carry them away, leaving the courtyard in a silence that felt, for the first time in 3 tense days, genuinely peaceful rather than merely braced for the next threat. Rias let out a long, shaking breath, the composure she had maintained throughout the entire ordeal finally cracking into something closer to relief. It's over, she said quietly, mostly to herself. For now, at least. For now, Sona agreed, stepping forward with her own counsel relaxing visibly behind her. Though I suspect Vesalius meant precisely what he said about continued observation. This is a truce, not a resolution. A truce is more than I expected walking into today, Rias admitted, and then, finally, allowed herself a small, exhausted smile as she looked down at Issei, still sitting against the courtyard stones with Asia's healing light steadily restoring his strength. You did that. All of it. I am so proud of you. I do not think I have adequate words for it right now. Issei looked up at her, at Akeno kneeling on his other side, at Asia's careful, focused healing, at Kaneko and Kiba standing watch nearby, still alert despite the danger having passed, and felt something settle deep in his chest, warm and certain and entirely unshakable. We did that, he corrected gently. All of us. Together. Nobody argued with him. News of the truce reached Azazel within hours, and he arrived at the school the following afternoon, his expression a careful mixture of relief and genuine curiosity, as Rias walked him through everything that had happened in the courtyard the previous evening. A duel, he said, settling into his now familiar seat across from Rias's desk. That is not a resolution I would have predicted, though in hindsight it makes a great deal of sense. Vesalius has always valued demonstrated proof over theoretical argument. It is, in its own way, the most honest currency the choir actually deals in. He said he would continue observing, Issei said. From a distance. That the truce is impermanent, just, I guess, a pause while he reconsiders everything he's believed for the last 1,000 years. That is more than most vessels in history have ever managed to earn from him, Azazel said, something like genuine admiration coloring his voice. I have heard stories, fragments really, of others who tried to reason with the choir before you. None of them succeeded in getting anything beyond an immediate ceiling. You have done something remarkable here, whether you fully appreciate it yet or not. I had a lot of help, Issei said honestly, glancing at Rias, at Akeno standing near the window, at Asia seated quietly on the couch. I don't think I could have managed any of it alone. That, I suspect, Azazel said, is precisely the point Vesalius needed proven to him. Not that the power itself had changed, but that the circumstances surrounding it had. A god sealed away for centuries, given a second chance and immediately surrounded by people willing to hold it accountable, to support it, to stand beside it rather than simply wield it. That is not the same situation the choir sealed away all those centuries ago, and I think, on some level, Vesalius recognized that difference clearly enough to grant you this reprieve. Rias nodded slowly, considering. Do you think the choir will remain quiet, going forward? Or should we expect further tests, further visits, further uncertainty hanging over everything we do? Honestly, I could not say with certainty, Azazel admitted. Organizations built on centuries of unbending principle do not change their fundamental nature overnight, even when confronted with compelling evidence. I would not be surprised if Vesalius continues watching closely, perhaps indefinitely. But I also do not think you need to fear an imminent attack, not after what you demonstrated in that courtyard. He extended a genuine truce, and men like him do not offer that lightly, or break it without significant cause. That's something, at least, Issei said, relief evident in his voice despite the lingering uncertainty. Azazel's expression shifted into something more thoughtful, his golden eyes studying Issei with renewed interest. I will confess, he said, my own curiosity about what you carry has only grown since our first meeting. A primordial power capable of demonstrated restraint, willing to hold back even under significant pressure during an actual combat test, that is genuinely remarkable, regardless of what the choir ultimately decides about your situation going forward. He paused, considering his next words carefully. Gregory would be interested in maintaining a friendly relationship, should you ever find yourselves in need of additional support. Not out of any hidden agenda, I promise you that much. Simply out of genuine scholarly interest, and a healthy respect for what you have already accomplished. We'll keep that in mind, Rias said, a note of cautious warmth entering her voice despite her natural wariness toward any faction's offered alliance. Thank you, Azazel. For everything. The support during the negotiation, the information about the choir, all of it. I do not think we would have managed nearly as well without your help. I am glad to have been useful, Azazel said, rising to leave. And genuinely glad this ended the way it did. I have seen enough conflicts between old power and new circumstances to know how rarely they resolve without significant loss on one side or another. This is a rare, welcome exception. He paused at the doorway, glancing back at Issei one final time. Take care of yourself, Red Dragon Emperor. And take care of that remarkable, stubborn conviction of yours. It seems to be serving you rather well so far. He left with the same easy, unhurried confidence he had arrived with weeks earlier, and the clubroom settled into a comfortable quiet in his absence, everyone processing the relief of a crisis genuinely, finally resolved rather than merely postponed. I keep waiting for the next disaster, Issei admitted, half joking, half entirely serious. Feels weird, not having something urgent to panic about. Enjoy it while it lasts, Akeno said, settling onto the couch beside Asia with a contented smile. Era, I have a feeling Ko will find some way to keep us busy soon enough. It always does. Let it wait a little while, at least, Rias said, a rare, unguarded warmth in her voice as she looked around at all of them, gathered safely together in the golden afternoon light spilling through the clubroom windows. I think we have all earned a little peace, however briefly it lasts. Nobody argued with her, and for the rest of that quiet afternoon, the clubroom held nothing more urgent than easy conversation, gentle laughter, and the simple, hard-won comfort of a family that had faced down an ancient threat together and, against every difficult odds, had come out the other side still whole, still standing, and still, unmistakably, together. The days following the choir's departure felt strange in their ordinariness, a slow return to something resembling normal life that none of them quite trusted at first. Classes resumed. Sona's council returned to their usual duties. Even the training chamber, which had hosted 3 straight days of desperate preparation, settled back into the steady, familiar rhythm of ordinary devil work rather than crisis response. It was Kiba who first raised the question that had been quietly circling the back of everyone's mind since the courtyard confrontation ended. They had gathered in the clubroom on a quiet Thursday evening, no urgent threat pressing down on them for the first time in what felt like months, and the conversation had drifted naturally toward everything that had happened. Do we know what Vesalius meant, Kiba asked, about continued observation? Are we simply supposed to go about our lives assuming the choir is watching from somewhere we cannot see? That does seem to be the arrangement, Rias said, though there was less tension in her voice than there might have been a week earlier. I have already reached out to Azazel to ask whether Grigori's own intelligence network has picked up any further activity from them. So far, nothing. Which I choose to take as a good sign, however cautiously. It is strange, Kaneko said quietly from her usual corner, knowing something ancient and powerful might be watching us, and simply having to live with that uncertainty instead of resolving it outright. Welcome to my life for the last month, Issei said, and the room laughed, some of the lingering tension finally breaking loose in genuine, easy humor for the first time in what felt like ages. Rias watched the exchange with quiet satisfaction, something settled and content in her expression that Issei hadn't seen since before the cathedral floor first cracked open. I think, she said once the laughter had faded, that we have earned a period of relative peace, however temporary it might prove to be. I would like to take advantage of it, rather than spending every waking hour bracing for the next crisis. Does that mean actual normal club activities? Akeno asked, arching an eyebrow with playful hope. I have missed those, honestly. Ordinary contract requests. Boring paperwork. The occasional stray devil that does not turn out to be secretly housing an ancient primordial god. It means exactly that, Rias confirmed, smiling. Starting tomorrow, we return to our regular duties. I think all of us have earned a break from world-altering crises for a while. The room settled into a comfortable warmth at that, everyone visibly relaxing in a way they hadn't fully allowed themselves in weeks. Issei found himself glancing around at all of them, at Rias's steady confidence, Akeno's returning playfulness, Asia's gentle contentment, Kaneko's quiet ease, Kiba's easy smile, and felt a profound, grateful sense of having survived something that could easily have gone very differently. Later that evening, after most of the peerage had drifted home for the night, Issei lingered in the clubroom with Rias, the two of them finishing the last of the evening's paperwork in comfortable silence. The golden light beneath his skin had settled, over the past several days, into something quieter, steadier, a constant, gentle presence rather than the uncertain, unpredictable force it had been in those first chaotic weeks. "Thank you," Aurelian murmured softly, unprompted, as Issei set down his pen and stretched tired shoulders. For everything. I did not expect, when I chose you that night beneath the cathedral, that I would find something worth calling a home again. I had made peace with never having that a second time. You don't have to thank me, Issei murmured back, quiet enough that Rias, absorbed in her own paperwork across the desk, didn't notice the exchange. This is what family does, right? Doesn't matter how it started. Matters what it becomes. Family, Aurelian repeated, something warm and thoughtful in the word. I had almost forgotten what that word actually meant, after so many centuries alone. Issei smiled, quiet and content, and returned his attention to the paperwork in front of him, the golden light beneath his skin pulsing slow and steady, patient and finally, after so very long, entirely at peace. Rias glanced up at him a moment later, catching the small, private smile still lingering on his face. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "Just how far we've come," Issei said honestly. "A month ago I almost died in a broken church because I thought I could handle a stray devil alone. Now I've got an ancient god living inside me, an entire organization of god hunters keeping a cautious eye on us, and somehow, through all of it, this is the calmest I've felt in weeks." Rias's smile deepened, warm and genuine. "That is because you are no longer facing any of it alone," she said simply. "That was always the difference, Issei. Not the power itself. The people willing to stand beside you while you carried it." Issei looked at her, at the quiet certainty in her crimson eyes, and felt the truth of that settle deep into his chest, warm and unshakable. "Yeah," he said softly. "I'm starting to understand that pretty clearly now." 2 weeks passed in a rhythm that felt, remarkably, almost ordinary. The peerage returned to its usual duties, handling contract requests, patrolling the district, managing the small, mundane crises that made up most of a devil's actual daily work. Issei's training continued, but with less desperate urgency now, Rias and Akeno guiding him through steady, incremental improvements rather than crisis-level preparation for an imminent attack. It was during one of these quieter training sessions that Rias finally returned to the question that had been sitting, unresolved, in the back of everyone's mind since the night she first showed Issei the faded illustration in her family's archive. "I want to try something," she said, gathering the peerage together in the training chamber on a calm Sunday afternoon. "Something related to the 7 figures in that old text. I have thought about it a great deal since Vesalius's visit, and I believe it may be worth testing directly, now that the immediate danger has passed." "What did you have in mind?" Akeno asked. "Aurelian mentioned, weeks ago, that it was never alone before the severance," Rias said. "That it stood beside others who chose to stay, even when staying became dangerous. I want to ask it directly, now that things have calmed enough to consider the question properly, what that actually meant. Whether the bond it formed with Issei is meant to remain singular, or whether it was always intended to extend further." Issei felt a flicker of nervous curiosity at that, reaching inward toward the familiar golden warmth that had become so much a part of him over the past month. "Can you answer that?" he asked quietly. "Honestly, I mean. Not just what you think we want to hear." The answer came slowly, thoughtful, careful in the way Aurelian always was when reaching for memories still hazy and incomplete after so many centuries. "I remember standing beside others," it said. Not because I required their strength to survive, though it helped. Because power carried entirely alone, without anyone to share the weight of what it costs, eventually hollows out whoever carries it. I do not know if the bond can extend the way your illustration suggests. I have never tried, not once, in all the time since I first woke beneath that cathedral. Would you want to? Issei asked. If it turned out to be possible? There was a long pause before the answer came, quiet and, for the first time, genuinely hopeful. Yes, Aurelian said. I believe I would. Issei relayed the exchange to the room, and Rias considered it carefully, her expression thoughtful. I do not think this is something to rush into, she said finally. If the bond truly can extend to others, it deserves the same careful consideration we gave the original choice, weeks ago, when Aurelian first offered itself to Issei. Not a decision made lightly, or out of obligation, but one made with full understanding of what it might mean. That's fair, Akeno said. Though I will admit, after everything we have already been through together, the idea does not frighten me the way it might have a month ago. Asia nodded quietly in agreement, something thoughtful and hopeful in her pale eyes. I think I would want to understand it fully first, she said. But I do not think I would say no, if it came to that. Not after everything Aurelian has already shown us about what it has become. Rias looked around the room at everyone's careful, considering expressions, and allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. Then we take our time, she said. We are not in danger anymore, not the immediate, desperate kind we faced these past weeks. We can afford to consider this properly, rather than rushing toward an answer simply because the question has finally been asked. Issei felt the golden light beneath his skin settle into something calm and patient, content to wait for whatever came next rather than pressing urgently toward it. Whatever the 7 figures in that old illustration truly meant, whatever the future held for the bond he carried and the family that had chosen, so fiercely and so completely, to stand beside him through everything the past month had thrown at them, it felt, for the first time since the cathedral floor first cracked open beneath him, like something to look forward to rather than something to fear. That evening, as the sun set gently over Ko and the training chamber emptied out one person at a time, Issei lingered by the window with Rias, Akeno, and Asia gathered close around him, the quiet warmth of their combined presence settling into his chest like something solid and certain, a foundation built not from power or destiny, but from choice, freely and repeatedly made, to stand together no matter what came next. Somewhere beyond the edges of Ko, unseen and patient, Vesalius continued his quiet observation, and somewhere further still, in corners of the world none of them had yet begun to imagine, other old mysteries stirred, other ancient questions waited to be asked. But for now, in the golden light of a peaceful evening, surrounded by the people who had chosen him without hesitation, Issei allowed himself, fully and completely, to simply be grateful for everything that had brought him here, and everything still waiting, quietly and hopefully, to unfold. Later, once Akeno and Asia had said their goodnights and drifted off toward home, Issei lingered a while longer with Rias in the emptying clubroom, the two of them watching the last light fade from the sky together in comfortable silence. It had become something of a habit over the past weeks, these quiet moments after everyone else had gone, small pockets of stillness carved out of days that otherwise moved too quickly to properly appreciate. Can I ask you something? Issei said eventually. Of course. Do you ever think about how different things would have been, he said, if I hadn't gone into that cathedral alone that night? If the stray devil had just, I don't know, finished the job before Aurelian ever had the chance to reach me? Rias considered the question seriously, the way she considered most things Issei asked her, with careful, genuine thought rather than a quick, easy answer. I try not to dwell on it, she admitted. Not because the thought does not frighten me, it does, more than I usually let myself admit. But because dwelling on what almost happened rarely helps prepare for what actually did. She glanced at him, something warm and steady in her crimson eyes. What I choose to think about instead is everything that came after. How you handled something none of us could have prepared you for, with more grace and more courage than I think even you realize you had in you. I had a lot of help, Issei said again, the same quiet refrain he had offered Azazel hours earlier. You did, Rias agreed. But help only matters if the person receiving it is willing to actually accept it, rather than trying to carry everything alone out of some misplaced sense of obligation. You let us in, Issei. From the very first night, even scared and confused and barely understanding what had happened to you, you let all of us help carry this. That mattered more than you probably know. Issei felt the familiar warmth settle into his chest, steady and certain, and found himself smiling despite the exhaustion of the past weeks finally catching up with him. I'm glad I did, he said simply. I don't think I'd trade any of it. Not the danger, not the uncertainty, not even the parts that scared me half to death. Neither would I, Rias said softly, and for a moment they simply sat together in the quiet, golden hush of the emptying clubroom, two people who had faced down an ancient organization and an even more ancient god together, and had come through it not just intact, but somehow, impossibly, closer than they had been before any of it began. Outside, the last light finally faded from the sky over Ko, and the stars came out one by one, steady and patient, watching over a town that had no idea how close it had come to hosting the opening chapter of something far larger than any of them yet understood, and how much larger that story still had left to become. Thanks for listening.